Hello and welcome to this presentation on an analysis of the Western dating world and how to transcend the war of the sexes. My name is Don, and for those of you who do not know me or my work, and I am very excited to be presenting you this presentation because it's been a big passion of mine recently to be helping specifically men, but also women in general with relationships. And I've seen as I've worked with men and women and relationships in general, that there's a lot of fundamental challenges that are going on in the Western dating world specifically, but we can see a lot of these challenges developing within developing countries as well. And so it appears that there's a lot of confusion and a lot of frustration around what's going on. And I hope that in this presentation I'm going to be able to dissect sort of the challenges that people are going through and why the challenges are happening on a very grandiose perspective, but also on a very real sort of warfare-like perspective. And I want to go deeper into the details as to those things. So buckle up, it's going to be an awesome journey. I'm very excited to be presenting this information to you guys. I just want to give a special shout out to my friend Nick Farrison for some of his ideological contributions. He's a good friend of mine, and I value his knowledge, and so I have put a lot of his ideas speckled throughout this presentation, so I want to give a shout out to him. So as you can see in this photograph here, I'm sure a lot of people watching this know who this gentleman is. This is Andrew Tate. He has taken social media by quite the storm as of recent. Perhaps maybe a couple months ago he was a little more bigger on the scene. And then this is our classic red-haired, angry third-wave feminist. And yeah, that's an older meme. And so, you know, this is not to poke fun at anybody. This is not to fight for one side or particular, but this is really sort of the head. This is sort of the challenge that we're facing together, is this whole polarized dichotomy of this man and women that are of this paradigm and of this ideological perspectives. So let's jump in right into it. Okay, so an introduction. For the past 20 years, more dramatically within the past 5 years, dating culture within the Western countries has seemed to have taken a tumultuous turn of events. And with the advent of TikTok and social media influencers having a firm grasp on the hearts and the minds of Gen Z, movements like the red pill, men going their own way, or MGTOW, the black pill, and passport bros have developed as a reaction to the fallout of the effects of second and third, and to some extent fourth wave feminism. So for those of you who are watching this that don't know what these movements are, you can see this is actually a documentary where this woman goes into these men's rights movements, and that might sound funny to some people, but no, these are legitimate movements. And this is the symbol or the logo for men going their own way. Now, again, for those that don't understand or know, have not heard of these concepts, and this is very new to you, I'll sort of break down these ideas for you. So red pill is this idea that women basically are sort of like vampiristic by nature, and they want to just take things from you, and that they're it's basically rebranded misogyny, and it touts itself as this men's self-help group, but really it just boils down to women bashing. And you know, not to say that there isn't like a lot of value that people can get from the red pill. I mean, I certainly have, but I wouldn't consider myself somebody that follows the red pill, right? And so another offshoot of this branch is called MGTOW, and this is essentially basically just a bunch of men that are angry or fed up with dating and Western culture. They have had their heart broken by women, or they're basically just looking for masculine allies to help them cope or deal with the challenges that they've had with women. And so their whole thing is like, well, we don't need women, we're just going to do our own things, and you know, women can just be left to their own devices. And I mean, it's, to some people it's very helpful, but again, it's just defeating the whole purpose of relationships. The whole purpose of what we're trying to get at is to heal the relationships, right? To heal the masculine and the feminine polarities, the challenges that we're experiencing as a human species, right? And so again, this isn't necessarily the healthiest way to be looking at dealing with the challenges when it comes to dating. The black pill is even more of a darker kind of outlook on dating and relationships, and that's really just like how there's a social substrata of men that will only ever get the best girls, and there's nothing that you could do, no matter how much you work out, no matter how much money you have. There's really only a finite amount of men that will be able to succeed, and that women are this sort of box of how they behave, and irrespective of what happens in people's lives, women will always behave this way, and men will always behave this way, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's from the information that I've seen on it. Again, there is some fascinating information, but I would say it's just essentially also quite one-sided and very just dark in general. It's not very uplifting information. And I've actually seen movements like this radicalize a lot of men and a lot of these like incel forums online. Incel is short for involuntarily celibate, for those that don't know that terminology. And so, yeah, I've seen a lot of these movements really radicalize people, and it's very concerning to me. And the last one I mentioned here is passport bros, and this is basically this idea that men need to leave the Western world to date women in developing countries like the Philippines or Colombia or Thailand, because they're more traditional feminine women, and that they just need to give up on dating in the Western world altogether. And that's sort of where my work comes in. I'm very passionate about helping heal relationships, and rather than just running away from the problems, I really want to nip it in the bud head on. And that's part of why I'm going through this presentation right now, to really kind of break it down. And so for those that don't really know about these waves of feminism, I don't want to get too much into these waves of feminism, and we'll touch on it a little bit later in this presentation. But so second wave feminism really had to do with recognizing women as being able to work and having more job opportunities. First wave feminism was more about women having the right to vote and having the right to own land and just basic rights. And then the second wave feminism had more to do with work opportunities. Third wave feminism had more to do with like women wanting to have more autonomy with their bodies. So birth control was a huge thing with third wave feminism. This idea of access to being able to do what they want to do with their uterus, or stuff like this, stuff that has to do basically with procreation. And then fourth wave feminism was primarily marked with the Me Too movement, which has to do with bringing awareness to sexual abuse and violence. And we're going to be talking about that a lot more later in this presentation. So, influencers like Andrew Tate, Sneako, and Myron Gaines from the Fresh and Fit podcast, and you can see these are the images of these people here, spread through social media like wildfire, almost to the point of where there was a few solid months where every other video clip was from one of these influencers. And these types of influencers, generally known as red pill influencers, took umbrage with terms like toxic masculinity and with the normalization of misandry in the modern Western culture, and became very vocal about the hypocrisy and the toxicity of Western dating. For those that are not familiar with the term misandry, many people are familiar with the term misogyny, which is the hatred towards men. The hatred towards women. Misandry is the hatred towards men. And their voices filled a void for so many men that felt like they could not express their grievances with modern day relationships and dating properly. Unfortunately, the rise of red pill influencers created a stir that did not necessarily solve the problem altogether, but instead slightly radicalized young men. And this has left us with an even further polarized population, and we seem to be getting nowhere in this endless war of the sexes. So again, I don't necessarily condone a lot of the information that these men talk about in these podcasts, but I have found some good value in some of these podcasts, but they're still operating on a very polarized and often angry perspective, and that is not really going to help the situation. So in order to properly dissect the current issue we're facing in the Western dating world, it's important to discuss a number of different factors that are pertaining to this cause. We need to go over at least in some cases briefly, topics like feminism, red pill, cultural warfare, national, religious, and cultural value systems, the challenges of modern day living, social issues, and finally the solutions. You can't really talk about the dating world within the Western world unless you talk about all of these things, because all of these factors play into how we interrelate between men and women. And it's my objective to piece together the puzzle of what is contributing to the instability of the relationships within the Western world. And it's not meant to be an exhaustive analysis, but to give a clear enough context and enough to understand, to give people resources to people that are serious about doing the inner work in order to heal themselves and really be an ally and a healthy, conscious voice out in the world that seems to be really kind of twisted. Please note that I'm only speaking about Western worlds. I'm only speaking about the Western world in this presentation, namely Anglophone cultures and to some other extent first world countries. So when I say Anglophone, I mean like Canada, the US, Australia, New Zealand, but also we've seen a lot of this in the Scandinavian countries and Western Europe, and we're also seeing a lot of the rise of this in South America as well and in Asia, but basically all throughout the world. But these issues have been more solidified within the Western world as opposed to the developing nations, right? Different countries may be experiencing different challenges in their cultural and historical evolution, and the parts of this information might not directly reflect your nation's culture or history accurately. So for those that are watching this presentation that are from a country that is not what I'm talking about, just take it with a grain of salt. I've talked to some people that were part of feminist movements in South America, and the feminist movements in South America, what they talk about and how they view themselves as very different from women, feminist women that I've talked to in the United States, for example. So just take this with a grain of salt. It's not an exhaustive thing talking about every single person throughout the world. This is just coming from Western cultures. All right, so understanding the cultural warfare between the sexes. As we progress through human consciousness, there are inevitable pitfalls and traps that we come into as a means of being blinded to our cultural and national and religious educational programming. And with this being said, without getting too into the weeds about conspiracy, if we can look at things from a bird's eye perspective, things start to feel like there's a grander orchestration of cultural warfare. And it's important to look at all of these things not from nitty-gritty details per se, but to look at what's actually going on from a broader perspective, to see things from a larger lens. That's what it means to expand your consciousness, right? How can I see this from a grander perspective rather than my own myopic or short-sighted view of how things are going based on my own individual experience, right? And so just like every wave of feminism was based in a reaction to a perceived injustice and perhaps a legitimate injustice, the red pill too is a reaction to perceived injustice and also perhaps legitimate injustices. We can look at the red pill as sort of twofold. One, as a reaction to the progressive waves of feminism, but also a deliberate attack on the culture to further divide humanity, to weaken the family unit, and to pit men and women against each other. It's a classic divide and conquer strategy that has been actually happening for a very, very, very long time. This is just a new rebranding of the same issues that humanity has been experiencing for a long time. So in the context of this presentation, it's important that we maintain this basic premise, that we're not pointing fingers at each other. We're not saying, oh, Andrew Tate this, or oh, those feminists this, or oh, men are shit, or, it's the point is to not point fingers. The point is to look at it from a broader perspective, to see that there's just two extreme sides that are just attacking each other, but there's also what appears to be this grander orchestration of poking the bear on each side and upsetting and offending each side of the group so that there is an emotional reaction to each one of the groups. It's very important to keep this in mind because this presentation is not meant to point fingers and like a lot of what the red pill does, or like MGTOW, or a lot of these things, and that's not my objective. My objective is to not point fingers at those terrible liberals, or those Proud Boys, whatever. That's not my objective. My objective is to be very objective with the data and the information, which could come across as very politically incorrect and controversial, but I'm trying to look at everything from a broader perspective. And but again, it's important to see that this could be controlled opposition. And controlled opposition is basically a force that is creating this opposition, but it's actually contained within a specific set of parameters that compel people to act and behave in a certain way to get them to to behave in a way that's advantageous to the person that's trying to create that controlled chaos, right? So controlled opposition thrives in the shadows of inevitable human progress. And it's the chaos that results that compels change. But if we stay too deep in the chaos, we lose sight of the truth. So what I mean to say by this is that inevitably, if we want to progress through something, we have to challenge the status quo. And by challenging the status quo, we can look at the deeply held beliefs from a broader, larger perspective. And perhaps the challenging of that status quo will actually really help things in general, really help people in general. However, sometimes we don't need to challenge the status quo. We don't need to look at things from a different perspective. There's a tried and true system that has worked for millennia, and there's really no need to change anything. You know, what's the expression? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So that's what I'm sort of getting at, is that when one pokes and prods at standard traditional systems and tries to change those standard traditional systems, there could be some inevitable chaos that ensues, because we're basically messing with the foundation of how humans view themselves within society. And there's always going to be some form of discomfort or discordance between that. And that's where the chaos can thrive. And if we get too deep into that, that's where we really lose ourselves. And I think that we've been able to see that throughout history, right, on many, many different occasions. So that's sort of what I'm getting at, is like, let's just try to take this from a broader perspective and not look at things from like pointing fingers, right? Okay, so the polarization of the extremes. With every form of polarity comes an equal and opposite extreme. This is like the pendulum swinging back and forth. It goes really, really high on this one side, and then it goes really high on the equal and opposite side, where we become an exact reflection of the thing that we hate and resist. With this being said, it's important to see that both of these social movements are just equal and opposite polarizations of themselves. With every wave of feminism comes both honorable people with a worthy cause, as well as extremists that push things too far. We could see this with the rise of red pill influencers. There is a deliberate attempt to make sweeping stereotypes of both men and women, and each side cleverly uses tactics to make their point seem more convincing while downplaying the opposite arguments. And you know, and if you just look at any of these interviews of really grounded and calm, rational people going on any of these shows or these podcasts or these street interviews, we can see that there's a lot of hypocrisy within both of the sides. So coupled with the power of social media, this polarization manipulates viewers into believing a heavily polarized perspective, as opposed to a balanced and holistic perspective, which is what I'm trying to get at with this presentation. So a perfect example is that red pill media, such as like the Fresh and Fit podcast, deliberately invites promiscuous, low IQ women on, or radicalized feminists to talk about relationships. The problem with this format is that a lot of men that don't actually talk to women in real life think that the women that they have on the show are representative of all or most women, which is just simply not true. I mean, if you go out and talk to most women are pretty easy to get along, and they're nice, and I enjoy their company. They're not like these crazy, horrible women. So they deliberately curate who they want to come on the show, such as Instagram influencers or OnlyFans models, because they know it gets views, and because it both benefits the show and then the women that are clout hungry, that want to get attention, right? That they know that that's what's going to get views. So it's just marketing, right? And conversely, a large number of major universities in the Western world are indoctrinating men and women with liberal and politically motivated rhetoric and curriculum. I mean, that's the truth. If you go to most major universities, it has a very, very liberal tilt to it, and that's just the truth. And now it's possible where students can actually get master's degrees in both gender studies and social justice, where the primary motivation is to examine how certain groups have been and continue to be oppressed and victimized by people in power, which normally just turns into blaming men. The patriarchy, right? So although the curriculum may not be explicitly designed to create misandry, young and impressionable minds may begin to express these sentiments as a result of being exposed to this information. The same with the red pill movement, right? So again, we're looking at the polarization, the equal and opposite polarization of what's going on, right? All right, so now we're going to switch gears into actually breaking down what's happening with the conflicts of values that are going on. So we're going to be using the spiral dynamics model to understand the dating culture clash. And I find that this model is extremely powerful, and it is so helpful for me to, and for anybody really that gets involved in spiral dynamics, to understand what motivates people and why people do what they do. And so we're going to be using this model to understand the values between dating. So spiral dynamics was created by Don Beck and Claire Graves, and it's a powerful model for understanding how value systems and worldviews emerge as an interaction of life conditions and the mind's capabilities or capacities. The spiral dynamics model utilizes a color system to explain the values in a worldview. So this color system is unique to the spiral dynamics model, and as we go throughout this presentation, I'll be going more into what the color systems mean. So most countries primarily hold one color as a primary national value system. However, in the case of a nation of mixed identities and emergent ideals, such as the US, it's important to utilize a multitude of colors to explain the interpersonal dynamics of differing cultural values. And we will use the spiral dynamics model to explain the cultural clashing that we're seeing in the Western dating world, to bring more clarity to the issues as to what we're facing now. All right, so let's break it down. So as you can see right here, this is the spiral dynamics model. So the spiral dynamics crash course. The spiral dynamics model is both very simple to understand and yet it's extremely nuanced. And so for simplicity's sake, we're only going to be focusing on tiers 4 to tier 7, which is blue through orange, and briefly touching on red. So blue, as you can see, is number 4. It has to do with order and authoritarianism. And then yellow has to do with integration and systemic thinking. And we're going to be breaking this down into more bite-sized pieces as to what I mean. So you will primarily come to find that the United States is primarily an orange nation, and we're going to be getting more into that later in the presentation. However, there are strongholds of blue that can be found in the South, as well as the south of the Mason-Dixon line, in the Bible Belt, in the Midwest, and in Utah. So we have patches of conservative Christians. Utah, we have a lot of Mormons in Salt Lake City. The Bible Belt, Tennessee, Kentucky, a lot of Bible thumpers, right? But we begin to see green dramatically emerging in the West Coast, and particularly in the liberal academia, like we've been talking about earlier, particularly with Gen Z and to some extent late-stage millennials, such as myself. I'm a late-stage. Actually, no, I'm just a firm middle-of-the-line millennial. So most major cities have a lot of green-oriented people. And as I'm going to be talking through this presentation, I'm going to be using these colors to describe different kinds of people. So if I say that's a yellow person, I'd be talking about the person that's in level 7. Or if I'm talking that's a blue value, I'd be talking about somebody that's in level 4, right? Okay. So now we're going to be breaking down what each one of these levels means at a glance. It's like a holistic perspective, so you can kind of get an idea as to what each one of these levels talks about. So as red moves into blue, feudalism grows into nation states. Authority structures evolve around sophisticated myths. Caste systems and economic classes allow for efficient productivity. The writing of records stores knowledge and history. People work in this life for paradise in the afterlife. There's a strong sense of belonging. Traditional values and religious meaning guide society. One identifies with one's own country. There's a high level of patriotism as well as nationalism. It's a theocracy, so a nation that's based on religious law. And there has classic family values. So some of the challenges that come with blue is that there's excessive authoritarianism. There could be fascism and abuses of power. There's fundamentalist religious conflicts. There's an oppression of rigid class systems and fixed roles. There's overt misogyny. People are seen as cogs in a machine. People might be closed-minded if it's not part of their traditional written dogma, or if it's not even considered if it's not within their religious texts. There could be a lack of joy in the living, so you're offsetting your joy in this life for rewards in afterlife. And there's an identification with a nation faith, and so it's like we're righteous and they're evil. So if it's not part of my book, if it's not part of my way of looking at the world, the other person is wrong. And there's not really any room for comparing and juxtaposing different sets of beliefs or philosophies or religious understandings. So there's some memes that are associated with blue. There's a very strict idea of right and wrong. There's like this moral absolutism. There's a sense of an obedience for a higher authority out of fear of punishment. So everything is in its proper place, like men do this and women do this. There's a sacrifice for the future reward. There's a feeling guilty when not conforming to group norms. So it's like, oh, you're sinful, so then therefore I feel ashamed being around people that want to see me as a better person. There's a lot of ethnocentrism, so my people are right no matter what. And so the system is there to help control the impulsiveness and the narcissism of red, which is the level before this. And so red has more to do with power and control and egoism. So a lot of people in drug cartels are in a very red perspective. So like I have bigger guns, I have more weapons, I have more money, so I'm more powerful than you. It's this very kind of like ego-based dominating society. And so blue serves as a way to kind of control those egotistical primal impulses of wanting to control and manipulate people for power. And there's also controlling impulsivity with fear and guilt. And so without trying to sound too judgmental or negative within blue, there's still a lot of values that comes with blue. And as we can see, what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down the sub-tiers. So within each one of these sub-tiers, a lot of people could be still being influenced by red, but also have blue perspectives. There could also be people that are in solid blue, and then there could also be people that are going into higher tiers. So if we go back to this here, red-blue would be somebody that's in 3 moving into 4. Or blue, solid blue is just somebody that's just in 4 and doesn't share any values within 3 or 5. 4 to 5 is somebody that is still based in a lot of blue, but also shares a lot of values with an orange, right? So these are what I'm calling sub-tiers, right? So this is not to say that there aren't good or bad things within these tiers, and that there are not just bad things or just good things within these tiers. There is what I call shadow within each one of these tiers, and in the next slide we're going to be getting into that. So what are some of the more memes within these sub-tiers? Well, red-blue, it still utilizes fear to impose fear of the afterlife to impose force. So for example, it's like a violent enforcement of religious laws. So if you don't comply to what the Quran says, then we're just going to utilize Sharia law, and we're going to use fear and violence to control your behaviors, right? So that's a classic red-blue behavior. It's more of like, oh, you better follow the will of God or you're going to be punished, right? That's a classic red-blue tier, right? So there's a big machismo culture, and I notice this a lot in South America. There's this idea of narcissism within men. There's this idea that men are always right and women are second-class citizens, and that women are stupid and they're second to men, and that so it's like, so red-blue is a very, very machismo culture that we'll see. There's also overt misogyny and violence towards women. So with machismo culture and violent enforcement of things, there's also violent enforcement of gender roles, right? So there's inter-religious conflicts with ethnic wars, such as like the Sunni and the Shiite, or back in the day, we don't do this anymore, between the Catholics and the Protestants, right? And so now we're moving into blue, which is the solid blue. So there's a less fear-based and more dogma-based. It's not like, oh, I need to do this because I'm afraid that God's going to hurt me. It's more just internalized dogma of, oh, well, everybody's doing this, and this is what my imam taught me, or this is what my priest taught me, and so I'm going to do this, and this is the right way to be, and this is how I have to be to function within society or to please God or whatever. And there's a genuine desire to be a good person based on what religion dictates. And this is where we first start to see a large emergence of a desire to be an ethical and honest person for the well-being of the society as a whole. And so values are following a rigid, so it values following rigid gender roles. So like what I'm calling dogmatized misogyny. So dogmatized misogyny would be something to the effect of, you're a woman, you have to behave this way, you have to submit to a man, because it's in the Quran or it's in the Bible. So following religious dogma is central to the education, to the family, and the life our holy books tell us how to live, and we have to follow our life by the holy books. We could also see this with ultra-Orthodox Jews as well. And material gain is less important than favor with God. So they're not really people within this paradigm. They're not really focused on making less money. They're more focused on gaining favor with what they believe God is, right? And so now we can look at the positive and the negative aspects, or what I'm calling the shadow aspects of each one of these sides. So as we had mentioned before, red, blue, there's a lot of misogyny, it's fear-based, violent enforcement, there's a big rule of the jungle, right? But we could also begin to see immorality. We start to see seeking the value of a healthy family structure, and there's a decreasing of desire to use power to control others. As with red, which is just, I want to be more powerful than other people. With solid blue, the shadow that we see in this is dogma. It's very rigid. It doesn't encourage critical thinking, like, why would God do that? Or why would Muhammad write that? Or it's just kind of like, well, this is what it is. Why, like a classic expression is, why would I question God's word? It's like I've talked to people that are in solid blue, and that's the answer that they give me. I ask them questions about, why would God say this? And they say, what's my right to question God's word, right? So it doesn't really encourage like a sense of really critical thinking. It's just kind of following it to the book, and it's like, this is how it is, and this is how it's always been, and it's not going to change. And people that are in this paradigm, they're anti-everything considered their religion. So any kind of thing that's outside of the perspective of the boundaries of what the religion says, it's very vehemently opposed. But there's a lot of positive things within blue as well. There's a lot of self-sacrifice, value-oriented. I'm going to sacrifice myself for God or for my family or whatever. There's this honor and there's this integrity that we see in blue, which is very admirable. There's a regulation of destructive impulses, like clear guidelines, like you shouldn't be lustful, you shouldn't steal, you shouldn't murder. Like those are great things to be codifying those kinds of things, because it really creates a sense of cohesion, right? There's more stability with the family units. There's clear guidelines for how gender roles are supposed to be, or interpersonal expectations. So it makes life easier for people that are still struggling to figure out how to interact or interrelate with the world, right? Okay, so now we're getting into the relationship aspects, and so blue in relationship. So solid blue relationships are arguably one of the more stable relationships, and this is because there are clearly defined boundaries and expectations of men and women that have been time tested and work very well. However, they're not necessarily based in any form of personal self-actualization, and blue relationship structures may mainly be maintained by masculine domination, and it's also very rigid. There's not really a room for personal development or growing. It's primarily based out of gender roles. So relationships are primarily a means of playing out gender roles. You're a woman, you take care of the kids and raise a family and cook and clean and provide for your man, while men are expected to go out and provide, right? So one stays in a relationship out of obligation or religious or social pressures, and in many cases codependency. So women are not expected to work a traditional corporate job, women are primarily expected to be a homemaker, and men are expected to exclusively provide for the resources. And men are taught to provide and protect for their women and children, and women are expected to obey the dictates of their men, please them and raise their children. Like, this is classic blue relationships. And as we'll go and see, as we progress through these ideals within the spiral dynamics model, we'll come to find that if we've not actually integrated lower levels, and that's another important thing to say, it's like there's not one that's better than the other. The only difference within these levels is that they're more consciousness expanded, that they include more possibilities, they include more perspectives, right? And so as you go up this spiral dynamics model, you will be able to integrate all of the positive qualities of these levels that are beneath them. And it's very important. It's kind of hard to talk about something that's not necessarily hierarchical, but is spoken about in hierarchy terms. So it's very important to remind people that this is not about hierarchy per se. This is more just about expanding your level of possibilities and consciousness, right? Which is normally more love-based. So that's an important note to put. So within these photographs, we'll see like this is a classic Muslim relationship, or woman wearing her, I believe that's a niqab or something. I'm not sure about the terms and the definitions, but we'll see their traditional dress. We also see this Mennonite women as well, and then this is an image of like a classic 1950s homemaker, and then I have this this funny image of a man spanking a woman, so like to represent more of like a systematized misogyny, like men, controlling women or whatever, right? So a lot of people still hold this in regards. They still want this kind of relationship. And we're going to see that there's this really big conflict when it comes to getting in terms like green, and the majority of younger people are being taught and in some cases indoctrinated into green ideologies, which really, really bashes heads with blue. And so we're going to get into that a little bit further on. So now we're going to be moving into the next step within the spiral dynamics model. So it goes from blue to orange. So orange at a glance. As blue moves to orange, science and rationality eclipse superstition. There's logical thought, the human rights arise, we have first and second stage feminism arising, legal freedom, the US Constitution, free markets, medical advances, capitalistic democracies. We have goal setting, personal achievement, the good life, and morality are based on principles and not religion. Sounds a lot like the US, right? Because that's what the US is primarily based on. It's a super, super orange country. Our schools teach these principles of being an orange. The U.S. is seen as a very orange nation. And so some of the challenges with orange is that there's a materialistic fixation. There's a loss of the sacred that we see in a lot of the levels that are below red, like purple, which is more like tribal ideals. We have excessive consumerism. So it's always about money, 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 buy, 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 buy. So we have scientism, which ignores all the other fields of truth and preferencing of the empirical. We have the ecological crisis. We have an identity crisis. There's an alienization. There's hyper-individualism, the workaholism, goal-setting fixation, economic inequality, class warfare, nations destabilized because of capital flow. There's an ethical crisis. We have profits at all costs, excessive corporate power, resource wars, ignoring feelings, and just getting the job done. So this is more of the challenges that we have in orange. So orange at a glance, a lot of the memes are the distribution of responsibilities. I'm the CEO, you're the manager. We have full of viable alternatives. So it's like as science develops, we see lots of alternatives for dealing with the challenges. It's not just focusing on how things have been within our books, and this is how it's always going to be. There's pragmatic tests for advantages to succeed. There's this testing of new possibilities. There's these iterations of how can we do things better, and that's one of the benefits of orange. We're always searching for the best solutions. Truth is not delivered but discovered. This is another big thing. It's like, hey, let's test to see how the universe works, and science and physics, and so we're going to discover what all these things are. And they're not just written about in this old book, and we just follow the way that this old book was written, right? So there's this playing to win. There's this enjoyment of competition. There's this whole it's classic capitalism, right? Classic free market, if you will. My product is better than your product, and then therefore I can outcompete you. So many laws are written to protect the individual. This is a big thing. So things like what's the word I'm looking for? Unions. Like this is classic orange. And then money rather than loyalty is a lot more important. So there's not really a sense of loyalty to one's company or one's religion. It's more just like, how much money can I get? And that's where my loyalty is. My loyalty is to finances and materialism, for example. That's somebody in classic orange, and that's what they would think about. So here are the sub-tiers within orange, and there's three that we want to be talking about. So blue-orange. So blue-orange, this is where most of the people in the U.S. are. This is the majority of people in the U.S. It's your classic blue-collar worker, the backbone of America, right? So I work Monday through Friday, and then I have church on Sunday. Classic people in the U.S. This is the vast majority of people that, I would honestly say the vast majority of people in Western Europe or in the US or Canada or something like that. So what's really cool about blue-orange is that it still values traditional gender roles, but it's not as dogmatic. We start to see that, okay, well, women can go to the workforce too, and that's fine, and that, of course women are equally on par to men, and of course they can compete just as well, if not better, in a corporate setting. So we start to introduce these ideas, which is, again, where we come from the first and the second wave feminism, right? So solid orange, this is profit over all. This is hyper-materialistic and atheistic kind of way of looking at things. So a classic orange statement is trust the science, right? Like if it's in these official psychological books or these official Harvard peer-reviewed documents, it's like, this is it, and this is logical and peer-reviewed, and there's nothing outside of what can't be measured. There's no room for any kind of spiritual or magical movement. It's all just demonstrable science that we don't understand, right? So that's a classic person in orange. And so the challenge without blue, if you're just solid orange, is that we might resort to ruthlessness and by being ruthless of attaining wealth. So then in that kind of case, you would actually drop down more to red. And so that's very interesting how there's this dynamic between red and blue. And if you skip one level or you're born into one level without integrating the lower levels, you could fall back onto a level through your behavior or through your paradigm. You could fall back onto a level that you haven't integrated. So that's another interesting nuance of the spiral dynamics model. And we could actually see this kind of behavior through like Wall Street, for example. So classic, like The Big Short. So if you watch that movie about the housing bubble, it's all like, oh, these are all toxic loans. We'll never be able to pay this back. We're all just going to bundle it and make tons of money, without any kind of logic or financial oversight or smart business making moves. It's just like, I'm just going to make a ton of money and I don't really care what happens to people, and I don't really care if this destroys the whole economy. It's just me first. I want money. I don't really care, right? So there's a lack of ethics. There's a lack of financial oversight. There's a lack of seeing far into the future. It's very reward me now. I want the money now. And so another classic orange thing is more is always better. Bigger house, bigger car, hotter wife, 2 homes, 3 homes, a bigger boat, right? So this whole idea of more is better, that's classic orange, right? And so orange, it utilizes the knowledge of the financial system and the legal system to maintain power and status. And this is another really, really big thing that we see within orange, is that people will study the legal system and that they'll hide behind teams of lawyers and, I can't get in trouble with this now because there's a statute of limitations and I could pay for all these lawyers to protect me from all the shady stuff that I'm doing, right? So this is all classic orange. I'm going to utilize my power and my money to maintain my status within the society. Classic orange. Now this is where things start to get really interesting, and this is where we start getting into green. And so orange-green, this is where we come into the idea of conscious consumerism. There's a rekindling of the interests of spirituality. There's an introduction to social justice concepts, and there's an awakening interest into the well-being of the planet. So talking about, I joke about this, but like save the whales, like don't use plastic straws. You've seen that image of the turtle with a straw in its nose, like we gotta save the planet, right? So there's this introduction, and a well-meaning introduction. I'm not knocking these people that think this way. It's admirable, and it's a step in the right direction, but it's often based in kind of like, oh, I'm gonna do my part. I'm not gonna get a plastic bottle. It's like, okay, well, I mean, yeah, sure, you could be helping, but there's so much bigger issues than you just like not using a plastic bottle, right? So this is where we start to see this mixture of orange and green. This is where you see people like walking around the street like, oh, save the forest, and all these kinds of people that are well-meaning but are just kind of don't really actually create real solutions to help the world. So now we're gonna, because the Western society is primarily in orange, we're gonna really break down a lot of these sub-tiers more in depth, because this is really the meat and potatoes of what we're dealing with now, and a lot of green as well. That's a super, super important thing to talk about. This is really the meat and potatoes of the challenges that we have with the values of people within Western culture, right? So the orange subtiers the shadow and the positive aspects of solid orange. So again, atheistic, a loss of traditional values and principles, hyper-materialistic. It's a status contest, right? So I have more than you, you're keeping up with the Joneses. There's a big wealth disparity with classes and countries, right? There's an increase of narcissism. We'll see huge sense of narcissism. Within blue, it's like, oh, you can't be prideful. You know, pride is the fall of Lucifer, and pride is the worst sin of all. But within orange, it's like, how can I be more of a stud, or how can I be more of a boss bitch? And, you know, all this kind of things online. It's just this whole narcissism of I'm special, look at me. And there's a big disconnection from nature as well. Most people are just locked up in their cubicles or on their phones, or, you know, like, look at me, I'm in this apartment, I'm just making this presentation for you, right? But the good thing about orange is that there's a scientific pursuit. There's a living the good life, right? I want to go on vacation. I want to have nice wine. I want to have nicer cars. And there's nothing wrong with that, and that's a great thing to want to be able to enjoy your life. I think that as a human being, you should be able to enjoy your life, right? So there's an increase in intellectualism. There's an increase in scholarship. Modern medicine is enhanced. Modern technology is advanced. Life is much more convenient. I remember when I was living in Taiwan, and there was a 7-Eleven in every corner. And you could do anything in Taiwan. You could pay your bills, you could buy a flight, you can get your groceries done, and you could get all the snacks. And it was like, whoa, this is so convenient. Like, wow, how great is capitalism, right? And so there's a lot more opportunities for financial advancement within orange perspective paradigms. And then the subtiers more with blue orange, so this is like the intermediary between blue and orange. There's still rigid gender roles, but less so. And blue orange is often associated with poverty in the working class. So it's like I trade my time for dollars. I make this amount of money. I'm not really investing, and if I am investing, I'm putting it into like a CD or some financial instrument that's not actually really growing my wealth. So there's a lot of financial illiteracy that we see, and the religious experience is kind of shallow. It's kind of like, oh, I'm going to go to church and, you know, sing my hymns, and then I'll go whatever. It's just kind of like following the motions. There's not really this like earnesty that you have that you get with blue. It's like where my whole life is devotion to God, and I'm going to pray 5 times a day, and I'm going to do this, right? So there's this really big push within blue to be a good person. And within blue orange, your sense of spiritual connection becomes kind of shallow and a little bit it's just shallow is the best way to put it. So intellectualism is not as valued. So within blue, again, there's not as much intellectualism. It's like, this is what it's in my book, and I'm not going to question anything. And then again, with the blue-orange, there's a balance of personal pursuit as well as spiritual pursuit, and that's really, really important, because if you're too deeply into the spiritual, then you're kind of one of the opposite extreme, right? Or the same with the personal life. There's a strong family units, and there's freedom and opportunities arise for women, which is great. And then green-orange, which is again moving from orange into the next tier. So starts to begin lacking personal responsibility. So it's like pointing the finger at the man, right? So, all those capitalists or all those terrible people that are polluting the planet, they're the ones that are at fault. Like, we gotta fight the man, like that guy's bad, right? So there's a lot of shallow attempts at solving real world problems, like, just one less straw in the ocean. So it's this righteous indignation, right? I would describe that as like green orange. And it's becoming more concerned about the planet. But okay, so in the positive aspects of green orange, they're becoming more concerned about the planet, becoming more concerned about social justice. You're more compassionate, you're more open-hearted, and you still see the value in hard work. So orange-green is where we're like, okay, I'm still going to go and clean up the nature, and I'm still going to make money so I can go and be contributing to society in a good way and thinking of the planet. And so that's great. And there's a lot of really good stuff within green-orange as well that I really, really appreciate as well. All right, so how does orange look in respects to relationships? Well, with orange relationships, we begin to see sort of a mixed bag of relationships depending on the primary subtier that the orange subtier that dominates one's value system. So if you're blue-orange, as opposed to if you're orange-green, right? So that's what's really going to dictate the way in which you perceive yourself with relationships. So we begin to see a rise of single-parent households, dual income, no kids, or dinks, as you could see in this image right here. It's a man and a woman with a big thing of money in their carriage. We start to see a rise of same-sex couples that begin to emerge slowly, and that becomes more normalized within green. But again, there's still primarily a large portion of nuclear family households in orange. So this is the classic orange-blue, right? Very, very common. But we're starting to see these different types of looking at relationships in a different perspective. So one major factor of orange-based relationships is a dramatic increase in divorce. Without the conditions of blue, the stigma of divorce is decreased dramatically, and the opportunity for work allows for women to become more independent. And so, though we begin to see a pattern of the structural integrity of traditional relationships begin to diminish. And this is where, so orange and relationship, this is where we begin to see a sense of equality within one's relationship. So men and women begin to be expected to equally, quote unquote, bring something to the table. So gender roles begin to flip a little bit towards orange-green. And we're going to be talking more about that when we go into green. So if you're born into a solid orange family, there's a tendency for people to lose their values, all the while simultaneously feeling like something is missing, and then they feel like they begin to want them. And we can actually see this a lot in the interviews where a lot of women have gone through like this boss bitch phase, and they're like, hey, like, this is kind of hard. I can, I really could, I both simultaneously want to be with a man, but I also want to have my own independence, and but I'm still angry at the patriarchy, but I still value this system. So this is where we start to see this kind of separating from the traditional values and this sort of confusion as to why do we still feel pulled to these traditional systems, all the while simultaneously fighting against these traditional systems. And this is where things start to get a little bit interesting within orange, and then very much so into green, right? So green at a glance. So as orange moves into green, there's an awakened sensitivity to diversity. One begins to understand the relative or context-dependent nature of truth and becomes aware of the inequalities in life. There's deeper listening begins. There's an appreciation for victims' rights, and the desire to extend care for many people around the world often arises in green. So reaching consensus in groups is a hallmark of green. Environmentalism is a huge green factor with socio-political movements like Greenpeace or Amazon Watch, or a lot of these movements that are designed to intermingle politics within the well-being of people. So like a classic green thing would be affirmative action, right? This classic green. So the challenges of green is that there's excessive relativism resulting in a loss of boundaries. It's like, well, it could be this, or it could be that, or maybe this, or I'm going to include everybody. And so there's this sort of like this amorphic kind of, I'm going to include everybody because everybody deserves love. But there's also a loss of morality, right? There's a sense of aimlessness, and it's because there's this strict rejection of dogma. It's like, oh, I'm going to do whatever I want because morality is what I make it, and so there's this rising of solipsism, and solipsism is a philosophy that says, like, I am the center of the universe, nothing exists outside of myself, I'm basically my own God, right? So that's where we get this loss of morality. It's like if it doesn't serve me and my will, and I'm going to manifest my reality, then then it doesn't. Okay, then I don't really care about it, right? There's this extreme pluralism resulting in a loss of discernment and undue honing of, and then an undue honoring of primitive rituals. So extreme pluralism, and so it's like, well, we can include everybody and everything is okay, and so, but it's like, well, I mean, no, not everything's okay. Like, there's still bad people, there's still gonna be bad people that want to hurt you. It's like, accept everybody, but at the same time, it's like, well, no, I mean, I don't want to accept people that are going to rape my children, for example, right? Like, those are not people that I want to be including in my reality. And then an undue honoring of primitive rituals. So an example of this is, I mean, I don't mean to knock people like this. I think that they're beautiful people that really care about doing the right thing. But I was just recently in an ashram, for example, and all they would do is just bang on drums and sing Om Mani Padme Hum and be like, this is what our ancestors did. I'm like, well, I mean, yeah, but also not really. Like your ancestors didn't chant Sanskrit, but you're in the middle of the Amazon rainforest, like, you know. So it's just like this weird pseudo hodgepodge of I'm gonna do what my ancestors did, but there's really not like a deep understanding of the transformation of the ritual that they're doing. It's just kind of like, oh, I'm gonna beat my drum because that's honoring my ancestors. It's like, well, kind of, sort of, maybe. Or like, I'm gonna cut my hair like my ancestors did as a nod to my ancestors. It's like, well, I mean, maybe those people had more of a religious or spiritual significance to their hairstyle, and you're just doing it because it's trendy or it looks cool. And so that's kind of what it means. But there's also an over-romanticization of pre-modern past in ecological discussions. It's like, oh, if we could just go back to never having plastic, or we could go back to the way that our ancestors lived, that'd be great. And it's like, yeah, sure, that'd be great. The world would be cleaner, the air would be fresher, the water would be nicer. You know, we wouldn't have all these kinds of chemicals that are in the soil that we're going to talk about a little later. But, you know, also, you're also going to get malaria, and you're also going to get mosquito bites, and good luck with air conditioning, right? So there's this over-romanticization of, oh, we got to bring it back to how things were before all these terrible people came and destroyed our culture. And, you know, it's not so black and white, right? So it's one huge thing about green, and this is where we get a lot of the challenges coming from with green relating with blue and orange, is political correctness, right? This is really, really big challenge that people are going through. And there's indulgently long attempts at consensus. If you've seen a lot of these videos of all of these people coming together and they're like, oh, you know, we need to include all these people, and they spend like 40 minutes just finding a mutual point to agree on, like that's progress, right? Everybody's like, oh, I want this and I want this, and there's like this exhaustive attempt to try to please everybody, and so it really leads to nowhere. And there's also extreme postmodernism in academia, resisting healthy judgments and anything resembling ranking hierarchy at all, because everyone is equal. There's no such thing as hierarchy. Like, everybody gets a participation trophy, right? It doesn't matter if that person is just all around a better athlete than you. This fat little kid over here, he's equally as lovable, he's equally as great. It's like, well, I mean, I see where you're coming from, but that's just not true. So there's also a culture of victimhood, and there's also a narcissism of the me generation. Oh, I'm a victim of the system. I'm a victim of this, and so there's like this. Oh yeah, you know, you're a victim, and we need to change the system, and you know, all the terrible people that, you know. So there's this idea of like, oh, I'm a victim, and this is a really, really big challenge that green has, that a lot of people are struggling with when it comes to interpersonal relationships. So green memes. So a lot of people in green, they have this romanticization of let's join a community and experience shared growth, and that's great. I'm definitely encouraging this. Let's go back to nature. Like, let's support each other. Let's support each other's spiritual pursuits, and let's live in a healthier lifestyle. And yeah, there's a lot of great value in that. Amazing stuff. So liberating humans from greed and dogma. You know, if we all just like lived off the land, we wouldn't have greed, and we could just be free to be the way that we want to be, and that's beautiful too. So there's let's explore the inner beings of ourselves and other people. Let's promote a sense of community and unity, and accept multiple ways of seeing reality. Like, dogma's bad. Like, let's challenge the status quo. Let's go with how we feel, right? Let's if it feels good, it's the right thing, right? Leaders are more facilitators and they're less autocratic. Like, classic green language is if everybody gets together and they say, oh, you know, this is, it's by donation, right? And so there's like this aversion to talking about money. It's not, no, this is what it costs. It's like, oh, it's a donation, or it's a contribution, or it's voluntary, right? There's no strict, rigid, like, no, this is what you do. This is the ranking hierarchy. I'm the person that makes the final decisions. There's like a big aversion to that kind of language. And so it can lead to extreme relativism, right? And this is a huge danger as well. And green movements have also given birth to civil rights and feminist and gay rights movements as well. So there's a lot of good values that have came out of the green movements. So green subtiers. We talked about the green subtier with green orange, but now let's really, really get into solid green as well as getting into yellow, right? So solid green, capitalism is evil and communism and socialism is the way. You know, if we had a government that was looking out for us and provided for every whim, there wouldn't be this wealth inequality, and all the people that are oppressed by the system would be great. And so there's this genuine desire to be equal, like this, and which I think is admirable, and it's honorable that there's a desire to do the right thing. There's a strong sense of social justice, and I like the term mean green, right? So you'll see a lot of people in green. They're very angry. They're very like, oh, you're so dogmatic. You're so terrible. And it's like, oh, and there's like this like anger. There's like this righteous anger of, oh, you don't understand. I'm trying to educate you, right? So there's a lot of like anger and resentment, and so that comes from the social justice, right? And this is another one of the big challenges that we're experiencing when it comes to interpersonal relationships, right? So we call that mean green, and that's a nod to my buddy Nick. He used that expression. I like that. So there's a big rise in New Age spirituality, and it's very interesting because blue is very much like Abrahamic religions, like, but then orange becomes atheistic, but then green is like, hey, like maybe I can like manifest my reality, and if I just do this like moon ritual, I'm gonna make more money. And so there's like this rise of New Age spirituality, which is kind of funny because it's just like rebranded old religions. It's not new at all. It's just a hodgepodge of different kinds of Wiccan and Hindu and practices all mixed together with Buddhism and stuff. So this idea of law of attraction and crystals and manifesting and journaling, like that all becomes super, super important within people that are green. So it rejects dogma and religion. It's like, oh no, I don't follow what the Bible says. So a lot of people that are in green, they would say, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual, right? So it's a classic green line. Oh, I'm spiritual, right? And so another thing about green is like it's generation me. It's very much me focused. And another thing about green also is there's a strong sense of misandry. And this is the big challenge that we're coming to when it comes to what the red pill is reacting to, right? So it's like men are crap, men are shit, men lie, men are terrible, we can live without men, we don't need men. Oh, there's this new science that came out that said that, you know, we don't need men to procreate, so we can just live in a world of only women, right? So a lot of that kind of rhetoric is where we hear people from solid green. There's this overt kind of anger towards men, and oh, you know, you're toxic, you know, toxic masculinity, right? So that's classic green language. And so we also see the rise of third and fourth wave feminism, which rightfully so has come out of a lot of anger. Like there's still a lot of problems that come with abuse against women, and there's still a lot of issues where women are not represented in the right way. And so there's some good things about solid green. So green yellow, this is where we begin. This is where things start to get really interesting. And this is like the crux as to why I'm talking about spiral dynamics in the first place. So with spiral dynamics, it's designed to sort of understand where people are coming from with their value systems, right? However, when we get into yellow, things start to get really interesting, and this is why I bring up yellow, which is fundamental to understanding when it comes to really healing these relationships. So we're going to get a little deeper into yellow. So with yellow, we begin to see the value in integrating the masculine and the feminine energies. We become less angry, and we desire to hear all sides of the perspective. We begin to see things as not so polarized, and perhaps we maybe feel called to join a community of like-minded people, and we begin to see the value of integrating and becoming more holistic. It's like, hey, maybe
maybe they have a point. You know, maybe they're actually saying something that makes sense. Like, let me just hear them out for a second. So this is where yellow starts to become very healing and holistic, right? And so here's some shadows and positive aspects of green. Again, there's this self-righteousness, hypocritical. One of my favorite lines is, accept everybody except the people that disagree with me. It's like, oh, I accept everybody. Well, you know, why do you accept that person? That's actually a bad person. Well, then you're wrong. You can't accept everybody, right? So there's this hypocrisy. It reminds me actually of this one thing that actually happened to me recently. It was really funny. There was this woman that had a shirt that said, accept all people. It said love. No. It said, accept everyone, accept all genders, accept all ideas, accept all people, accept all beliefs. And it was like, it was this beautiful shirt, but I kind of chuckled to myself. I'm like, that's funny, because there's some people in the world that totally would absolutely not accept you for having that on your shirt. Which is kind of a paradox, right? It's like there are people that would actually really, really hate you for wearing a shirt like that. So do you want to accept them too? You want to accept people that hate you, right? So it's kind of like a paradox, right? And then I actually brought that up to somebody, and then they got mad at me for saying that. I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like, so if you accept everybody, but you don't accept me for saying that, then you're not actually accepting everybody, right? So there's this sense of hypocrisy, right? So there's also a total devaluation of anything considered traditional. I'm not a traditional woman. I'm only going to take care of myself. You know, men are shit. You know, so this classic like boss bitch, like I don't need a man, fuck men, you know, all this stuff. Like that's classic shadow green, which again, it's just based in this idea of women wanting to be independent, women wanting to be seen as equal to men, which is great, and that's beautiful. However, it can turn very polarized, right? So you got to be very tricky with the polarization, right? And then again, this whole sense of misandry, like men are shit, I don't need men, whatever. But with green, there's a lot of open-mindedness. There's a focus on the planet and the well-being of the planet. It's very community-oriented. It's inclusive of those considered victims, and there's a lot of justice, and there's a lot of equality that is wanting to be looked into, which is great. And those are beautiful values that I really, really value in green. With yellow green, these things can start to seem like spacey and impractical. It's like, there's this idea of, well, now we need to start introducing systems that are going to change the world, right? And it's like, well, you know, it doesn't really work that way. I mean, maybe. So there's a sense of overly idealistic. If everybody just stopped going on the internet, like the world would be a better place. Or if everybody just, you know, like I think of the world, the song, what's the word I was looking for? It's that Beatles song where it's like imagine all the people, and everybody's like, yeah, like that'd be so great if all of these wonderful things were happening. So it's like that's classic yellow green. Like this is this overly idealistic way of looking at life. Like if only everybody could just love each other, the world would be a better place, right? So that's classic green yellow. And so there's a lot of internal instability as the opposites begin to integrate. There's a lot of where we really, really become confronted with our shadows. It's like, oh, you can't be, you're such a terrible person. But then we look at ourselves and we're doing like the exact same thing, but it's like the polar opposite. And we're like, oh, wait a minute, I'm kind of a hypocrite, right? So we really become confronted with our own hypocrisy. And that can be really, really uncomfortable to people that are going from green to yellow. However, with yellow, we see a lot of integrative things. We start to see a lot of solution-oriented mindset. There's a really heart-based desire to make big change, to do the right thing, right? And we begin to mix the heart with logic. It's like, well, I want to do the right thing, and I really love doing the right thing, but I also realize that there's practical things that I have to do on a regular basis to make that positive change. And there's a lot of peace around this injustice. And the injustice anger begins to resolve. It's like, okay, well, yeah, I mean, that's terrible, but what can I do about it? There's not the sense of victimhood. There's not the sense of righteous anger. It's the sense of, okay, well, you know, bad things are happening. You know, what are we going to do about it, right? All right, so what does green look in respects to relationships? And this is a really, really big thing because a lot of the challenges that I see with people that are talking about interpersonal relationships with orange or green or blue, is that the challenge is that they're pointing the fingers at green. So a lot of second and third and fourth wave feminists are in green. And so people are basically reacting to the shadow of green. And this is what we're all getting at. And then green is reacting to the shadow of blue and orange. So it's just the opposite shadow attacking each other's opposite shadow. And this is why it's so important to move into yellow, because the shadow is integrated within yellow. But I'm jumping ahead a little bit. So green relationships become fascinating because it's often very counter to what a nuclear traditional quote-unquote family looks like. So with all the extreme relativity of green, things may become unclear in terms of the relationship boundaries. So same-sex couples are happening. Bisexuality is also open. Open and polyamorous relationships are normalized. There's a sense of free love, which is very common that we see. But it's also very important to specify that there are plenty of heterosexual couples that primarily hold the values of green. These couples just tend to be more liberal politically. Another factor of green relationships is that there's a flip of energetic poles. So some women assume a more masculine energy and men assume a more feminine energy. We often see more masculine looking and acting women dating more effeminate and looking and acting men. You know, there's this whole push for, oh, I want my man to be more emotional or more soft or more gentle, right? And, you know, I can be the strong woman in the relationship. I can wear the pants in the relationship. A lot of people in orange perspective or blue perspective might mockingly call those men like soy boys, right? You know, there's this whole, it's like, oh, soy boys, it's just, you know, a bunch of these men are just these small muscle mass, weak bitches, right? So there's that's where we get the conflict from, is that kind of switching of the energies and the polarization. And sometimes, however, what we see in the relationship is that both people assume a very feminine role, right? So green is about opening and being accepting and being loving and being inclusive. So there's this whole feminine energy that comes with green, which is beautiful and empowering and really nice. And so that's why we see a lot more like effeminate, kind of soft and gentle kinds of relationships, right? There's not like this traditional strong masculine man. It's very much like, oh, we're both very gentle and sweet and going along to get along and being nice and doing the right thing, right? So another thing that's important to bring up within green is that normal or traditional masculinity might feel threatening or dangerous to women and men by those that are in green paradigms, as many green-based relationships are often quite overly feminized. And so they may say that, oh, men are toxic, you know, toxic masculinity. So your traditional kind of like, I'm going to be strong, I'm going to work, I'm going to protect and provide for my family, and I'm going to be like, oh, you know, so that might be seen as toxic masculinity. And so the idea of gender roles, let alone gender in general, often elicits a very strong negative reaction from people in the green paradigm. You know, there's this whole thing about how can you misgender me? Oh, you know, that's the gender roles, you know, both men and women can do these things. And how can you say that, you bigot? You know, so there's this kind of, again, self-righteous anger around this idea of gender, because green is a direct reaction to the dogmatization that we see in blue. Like, oh, you know, I'm not going to be a traditional woman. How could you subjugate me to the kitchen? You know, I'm a smart woman and you know, I don't want to do any of these gender roles. You know, to hell with your gender roles. So there's like a lot of people in green very much think that way about gender roles and gender in general. And then of course we have the whole transgenderism, right? So that's a whole other rabbit hole. That's not going to be as part of this scope. So a lot of people in green really have issues with the idea of gender and what that means. And again, this comes from the extreme relativity. There's this whole different perspective of there's 52 genders and, you know, everybody is a gender. And so it's like, whoa, wait a minute, what? Hold on. So things sort of get like way too overly inclusive of everything. And so this is a classic example of green within relationships, right? So within green relationships, we might actually begin to see a push for community style living in relationships. This is a very interesting thing. Oh, like traditionally, again, there's this over-romanticization of how things used to be within the tribal communities, that all women raised a child, and that there wasn't one father figure, that all the children sought out different kinds of father figures, and that the community raises the children. So in green, we start to see this push for community-style living. And there's often a renewed romanticization of tribal community-style living, as people may want the community to raise their children, such as done in tribal communities found in the Amazon. This is a really big thing that I've heard a lot of people in green talking about. And so relationships might also value more of a sense of freedom, which means that the relationship boundaries might look a lot looser. It's like, oh, I need to take a break, or I want to do this, or I'm gonna, oh, you know, whatever, you can just do whatever you want, and you know, as long as you tell me who you're sleeping with, I don't really care, and let's talk about this. And so it's this kind of like, I just want to be free to do whatever I want. And sometimes what that freedom turns into, not always, but sometimes what that freedom turns into is, I want to be able to do whatever I want without consequence. And again, this is the extreme relativity of green, which causes lots of challenges. So I have images of people that look like, people in green have a very, very distinct look, right? They look like this whimsical, hippie kind of person, you know, a lot of these tie-dye shirts, men, you know, they have the man bun, right? I mean, even I have long hair, so so it's that's the kind of aesthetic that you can see with somebody in green. And I also have this image of a woman standing on a man's head to represent the misandry that we see within the mean green perspective, right? Okay, so now we're getting into something really, really interesting, and this is the core meat and potatoes of what I've been talking about with what we need to do as we progress through the spiral dynamics. So this is the shift from green to yellow. So yellow is considered second tier. So within the spiral dynamics model, we have tiers. We have first tier, and then second tier, and then as we get on to some crazy other stuff, we start looking into these ideas of third tier and some really, really out there stuff. So yellow is considered second tier within the spiral dynamics model. It is a very dramatic shift in consciousness that radically changes the perspective of a person. So we can see yellow as a balance of all the levels of the spirals below it. Yellow fundamentally sees all the values within the spiral equally proportional. This is very important. They're able to use both their heart and their logic to pick from the best of all the levels and alchemize the shadow of each one of these levels. And when I use the terminology alchemize, that means it's like to turn lead into gold, to turn the negative stuff into something that is empowering, right? So this is the precipice in which we need to move from where we're currently at as a society, as the whole transcends, as a whole, to transcend the issues that we face in society now. This is super, super important that we begin to move into a yellow paradigm and then turquoise paradigm society, which is beyond yellow. So a really, really great analogy that my buddy Nick was telling me about was that green is like a ripe fruit. It's perfect to move into the second tier of consciousness. However, if it stays too long on the vine, it spoils and it's no longer able to eat. So yellow addresses the issues of green, as green addresses the issues of orange, and green and orange addresses the issues of blue, etc., etc., etc. And if we do not address the issues in the shadow of green, there's a serious danger of societal integrity falling apart. Though necessary for integration, healing the evolution. I worded that strange. Though necessary for integration, healing and evolution, green is more of an unstable state to be in because it's a shift of energetic values of masculinity and femininity. Though many factors contribute to this instability, the major factor regarding relationships is that men are more effeminate and women are more masculine. And this creates an energetic polarity imbalance if it's stayed in too long. And this descends into the weakening of civilization and, in the worst case, the collapse of a society. So the shift that we're going from within orange to green, and then in some cases green to yellow, is that although it's necessary, we only can stay in this green state for only long enough before it can actually become very toxic, because things really start to get flipped on their head when they get into green. So what occurs internally during yellow? This is very, very interesting. So those that have been looking at this presentation are like, I definitely share a lot of orange perspective. I definitely share a lot of green perspective. But what's this whole yellow thing about? What can I expect shifting into yellow? Well, unfortunately, only a small portion of people in the world are regularly operating at this level, and very few are in levels like turquoise and indigo and beyond. And perhaps in some other discussions that I'll have within my other videos, we'll be going into turquoise and indigo and beyond. So very, very few people have codified these levels definitively beyond yellow. Yellow begins to become more of the wearer of the whole spiral. It can take all perspective. Yellow releases the dogma of blue and yet keeps intact the nature of traditional values and connects to a higher power. It keeps the work ethic and the mission-oriented focus of orange and sees the matrix not as some evil construct, but as civilization just functioning as best as it can. And the anger of self-righteousness of green leaves, but the desire to be loving and inclusive and concern for the well-being of others remains. One's discernment increases dramatically as well. There's not this extreme relativity. There's this balanced perspective of like, hey, wait a minute, like maybe including everybody all the time is just not really the best idea. And so many people begin to integrate yellow by feeling the extreme polarity of self-righteousness as social justice groups. It will start to feel a little bit flawed and imbalanced and uncomfortable. And one will actually start to feel uncomfortable with feeling so polarized and unstructured due to the extreme relativity of green. So many people in yellow often dive into conspiracy because our discernment issues increase in yellow. One is able to really tease out what is really fake news and a genuine conspiracy against humanity. So a lot of people that I see going into yellow, they're like, oh my God, like humanity's under attack. There's all these things going on. Like, what do we do, right? But then yellow is like, okay, well, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe it's not so extreme. Let's find the middle path, right? So a classic yellow terminology is let's find the middle path. Let's find the middle road. So inner work becomes a central theme of yellow. One begins to desire and participate in plant medicine, breath work, and meditation, yoga. Anything that's designed to heal and connect the mind and the body and the spirit becomes an essential part of someone within yellow's life. There's also a deliberate and consistent attempt to try to heal oneself of trauma. We begin to recognize this trauma as we are able to clearly reflect on the shadow of each one of the layers of the spiral that we've been exposed to. So why yellow is the level that people need to be moving into to date? It's imperative that we move into yellow paradigm as people are able to communicate effectively with more balance, understanding, and respect. Anyone operating in a level that is below yellow will inevitably have some form of polarization. Within relationships, people can both equally value their independence and yet see the beauty and see the beauty and the value of romantic partnership and collaboration. There's this very nice harmony of I'm my own woman, I'm my own man, I have my own things that I like, I'm going to be living a life according to my own terms. However, it's really nice to have somebody that loves me. It's really nice to have somebody have sacred sexual intimacy with me. And hey, we can also build beautiful things together, right? That's classic yellow speak. So yellow recognizes that both men and women are equally capable, and that's okay if there are certain jobs that women and men are more inclined to do based on their energetic nature. It's okay if women want to assume more roles of like teacher or nurturer or cosmetologist, and it's okay if men want to be more math and construction oriented. That's okay. Like, it's normal that people have different energetic natures and they're more inclined to do jobs that are different according to their energetic makeup. That's fine, and there's nothing wrong with it, and it doesn't make a man or woman less or more of a person. So people in yellow will be able to respectfully see the grievances of all sides, as the grievances are often just shadows of unintegrated levels, and they'll both equally be comfortable with both politically incorrect and politically correct people. Dialogue will not be based in proselytizing or browbeating, but instead will genuinely be connected with understanding. So it's not going to be about you're wrong and here's why you're wrong, and I'm going to beat you with facts, or oh, you're such a bigot, you're such a terrible person, why can't you see, you horrible person? Like, that's not what the dialogue is about. It's really about genuinely listening and becoming present and understanding why people feel the way that they do, and then having open, rational, heart-based logical discourse if that's something that you choose to do. So the ironic part about someone in yellow is that someone in yellow will look very conservative to somebody in green who is often very super liberal. To someone that's you'll look super conservative to someone in green, but you'll also look super liberal to someone that's in blue. It's very interesting when, because I would say that I view my life more from like a yellow turquoise perspective, and when I talk to very liberal people, they're like, "Oh, you're such a conservative." I'm like, "Oh, I'm really not. I mean, I lean a little more conservative, but I'm not extremely conservative." And then when I talk to people in blue, they're like, "How could you agree with these terrible, hippie nonsense people?" I'm like, "Well, I mean, they got some good stuff, and maybe you should hear them out." So it's kind of funny. So you might come across as overly idealistic and totally impractical to somebody in orange, and perhaps even super woo-woo or ungrounded, and even though people in yellow are actually quite grounded and centered themselves, so somebody that's woo-woo is like, "Oh, I'm going to do yoga and meditation." Like, "Oh, are you just going to sit there and chant Om all day long?" Like, "Oh, you woo-woo hippie." It's like, well, I mean, there's benefits to sound therapy. There's benefits to homeopathy. It's like, no, there's actually some real legitimate healing science behind this. In fact, all Western medicine primarily comes from derivatives of plants that you find in the Amazon. So it's kind of like, well, come on, man. Like, no, there's definitely value that comes from green. So this is the reaction that you're going to get from people that are in, if you're in yellow and you're interacting with people in green or blue or orange, right? So what are some practical resources to assimilate yellow ideals? The good news is that there's actually a large increase of people that talk about yellow ideals, and this type of information is becoming more accessible and adaptable to people. Although some of these people are not perfect, their information, their topics is primarily focused on yellow ideals, whether they explicitly know that they're talking about yellow ideals or not. So some of my personal recommendations for people that talk about relationships and values, specifically from a yellow nature, are people like Jordan Peterson. This is a classic person that people love. I mean, I'm not saying that Jordan Peterson is perfect, but the way that he talks about interpersonal dynamics and relationships from like archetypal perspectives as well as social justice perspectives, he has very yellow language and often uses very, very yellow language. So again, he comes off as like this terrible racist bigot to people that are in mean green, but he also kind of comes across as like this so he comes across as like this racist, terrible bigot to people in green, but he also comes across as somebody that's a little too overly idealistic for people that are in blue, and perhaps godless for people in blue, right? So there's another lesser known woman that has a lot of really great work. Her name is Galatea, and her YouTube channel is called The Authentic Observer. She's got really, really great stuff that talks about the challenges of how femininity is looked at from Western society. Another guy, he's the bottom right corner. His name is Lauren Kren. He talks about masculine and feminine polarities. Another guy, Jake Woodard, does the same. And another woman named Laura Grant, you can find her information on Laura the Woken Mind on the Instagram page. I've actually done some interviews with her. Her content is very, very good. So what happens if we don't integrate the other levels? So there are many people that wonder about if they can transcend the levels without integrating the other levels below to some degree. And although the scope of this question is not too entirely important in regards to relationships, it's important to know that the phenomenon that happens if one is in, say, like orange or green and does not integrate the levels below them, they will not really have a very strong foundation to stand on, and their paradigm will be very shaky. For example, if we are primarily orange, we are atheistic and hyper-materialistic. We have a tendency to be nihilistic, and which can lead to some serious depression and anxiety, which blue helps to solve in this problem by giving us guidelines on how we can connect to a higher power and come to inner peace. But if we're primarily green and do not value blue or orange, for example, we will both simultaneously struggle to integrate sound principles and foundations of blue, and also struggle to thrive in a primarily orange-based world where we will reject the system, and we will reject the system that we ultimately rely on. So I love the expression hippie-crit, right? Like a hypocrite, right? So the people that are in green, forget the system, the matrix is terrible, and yet, hey, let me call my dad to send me money because I can't get a job, So This is where we get the reliance of green on the orange system, yet while simultaneously hating and rejecting the system. So there's like this hypocrisy, right? So I've had a lot of people be like, I don't want to, when I've talked to people about spiral dynamics, they say, I don't want to integrate blue, that's too dogmatic, or I don't want to integrate orange, that's too horrible and capitalistic. It's like, well, the fact of the matter is that if you're going to stay in that paradigm, you're not really going to have a foundation to stand on. And this is where yellow comes in. So in order for one to really become a spiral wizard, one must truly be proficient within each one of the levels of their values. And if we don't, we will always be operating on some level of the shadow, some level of trauma, or some level of emotional polarization, in which primarily the major issues arise from interpersonal relationships today. All right. So that is spiral dynamics. Now, this is sort of like part one of like the part two series. I might cut this into two different pieces, but this is fundamentally what is going on within the struggles between the relationships today. And it's not just these kinds of values. There's a lot of other factors that we're also going to be talking about within this presentation that are also affecting the challenges that we have with relationships today. So this is talking about spiral dynamics. I really encourage you to dive deeply into spiral dynamics. There's lots of good resources online about spiral dynamics, and you could use your own logic and discernment to kind of see, like what else is going on within spiral dynamics that is influencing the way that I think, with how I interact with other people in different value paradigms, within different colors, so yellow or green or blue or red or orange or whatever. And it's going to really give you a nice framework for understanding how people interact within with themselves and with other people when it comes to relationships. All right, so now we're going to be shifting gears a little bit into other external factors that are influencing what's going on today within society. So I call these the factors of discordance. So now that we've examined the spiral dynamics model in terms of interpersonal relationships, let's dive deeper into the additional factors that are contributing to the challenges of the modern day dating. The primary conflicts that come from the disagreements between one's values. The primary conflicts come from the disagreements between one's interpersonal values. However, there are a number of other factors contributing to the challenges of the dating scene. Some of these are considered politically incorrect and controversial, but all of them together paint the mosaic of the war on the sexes going on. So let's just suspend political incorrectness for a second, and let's really look at these things from holistic bird's eye perspective, like we talked about in the beginning of this presentation. Let's look at this from a bird's eye perspective and not get caught in the weeds. That's my whole presentation, to look at this from a bird's eye perspective. What are all the factors that are contributing to the challenges that we have within modern day dating right now? So we're going to talk about 5 major factors and then break them down and what they mean. So 1, the rapid decrease in quality of life in the Western world. 2, social media. 3, the attack on the masculine. 4, the attack on the feminine. And then 5, the attack on sexuality. All right. So why being a traditional man is exponentially harder in the modern world. So if a woman is coming to the conclusion like, hey, I actually don't really want to be a boss bitch anymore. I don't really want to, do this on my own. I would actually like a traditional man to be able to take care of me, or at least contribute mutually with me to growing together. But we need to break down why being a traditional man is exponentially harder in the modern world for a number of reasons. So the quality of life in the Western person has dramatically decreased for a number of reasons, which means that the standard of a traditional man, the standard to be a traditional man, has become significantly more challenging. So let's look at these factors. A single source of income in this day and age is simply not enough to be able to provide a serious quality of life for a traditional nuclear family. Inflation absolutely destroys wealth. It is just wreaking havoc on the well-being of people in Western culture, but anywhere throughout the world. I mean, I live in Ecuador, and I've seen the inflation affecting Ecuador, and I'm currently in Colombia right now, and I see inflation affecting Colombia, but it's like 4 times worse. Like actually 4 times worse in Western world. So that means that the cost of living and raising children dramatically increases. There's fewer job opportunities in the white collar jobs. So there's this overabundance of overeducated workforce without a lot of opportunities to really grow within their field of expertise. Many states don't offer living wage salaries, even if someone is just getting started. So this is a classic this is a classic green example, living wage, right? So as I was in the Western world I was working 2 jobs. I was working at FedEx and pushing boxes, but I was also working as a host at a fancy steak restaurant. I worked my ass off. And even with the living wage that I was getting working at FedEx, working basically part-time, I was basically working over full-time with my jobs. And I was still getting paid like tips and minimum wage working as the host. And I have a degree and I speak multiple languages, and it's like, even if you're getting started in these jobs, it's still next to impossible to live an actual high quality of life. And somebody in Orange would be like, well, then don't get a degree in like underwater basket weaving. Like that's a classic Orange statement. Well, you should have, if you didn't get a degree in underwater basket weaving, then you wouldn't blah 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 blah. It's like, well, no, I mean, there's a lot of people that have really, really good degrees from good schools, and yet they still can't get ahead, right? So even people that are just getting started, it's like, it's still really, really hard to get ahead in general. So the paradox is that degrees are now both mandatory and simultaneously useless because they no longer actually have a significant influence on pay grade or job opportunities. I mean, when I think of significant influence, I think of $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. That's a big, significant influence. But what the statistics show is that somebody that has a degree really can only make anywhere from like $6,000 to $10,000 more than people that don't have a degree, which is nothing to sniff at. Don't get me wrong, but like all the factors that are contributing to the well-being, it's like, yeah, $6,000 to $10,000 is going to help you maybe eat a little bit healthier food, or maybe help you stay in a little bit of a nicer apartment or something, but it's not going to dramatically increase your well-being of your life, right? So housing prices have dramatically increased while the quality has stagnated or declined. And so if we go with the red pill argument, so one of the big things that red pill says is that women are hypergamous. So the expression of hypergamy is that women only will date in your social status equally or above, and that this is why women leave men for wealthier or more successful men, is that their whole argument is that women are hypergamous. And to some extent I agree with this, but also to some extent I don't agree with this, and I also think that has to do with your level of consciousness. That's a little bit of a side story, but I'm just talking about what the red pill argument says. So if we're going and if we're assuming that the red pill argument is true for all or most women, which I don't agree, but again, this is assuming, and that women are hypergamous and that they only date to the same status or higher, now we have to consider that life is even harder for men now that men will also be competing not only against other men, but also against other women for status. And this makes it extremely challenging for the average hardworking, run-of-the-mill guy to be able to compete effectively. I mean, as a men's coach, I know many, many men, they're honest, hardworking people that work well over a 9-to-5 job, and they're honest, and they got good values, and they're just average run-of-the-mill dudes that just take care of themselves to an extent, and they just want to live life and just enjoy life and work hard. But those kinds of men, which is the majority of men in the Western world, now they're like, well, how do I even compete, right? And so any women that are watching this that are of the mindset of hypergamy, and you do have that mindset, you have to consider that, this is what a lot of men are going through. This is what a lot of men that just want to be a provider and a protector and take care of you, this is what they're facing. And it's not just about working hard and making money. There's a lot of other factors that contribute to how hard it is for men to be a quote-unquote traditional man, right? So this is not just me pulling stuff out of my butt. Let's look at some actual statistics as proof. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or the BLS, shows that in 2022, the average salary of a man in the U.S. is approximately $56,000 a year. The BLS also shows that the cost of raising one child to adulthood in 2022, adjusted for inflation, is almost $300,000. And this is just one child, okay? This is $290,000, which is a lot of money. And so the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis states that the cost of a home in the United States is now $428,000, which is almost $500,000. And so the Consumer Price Index also shows that inflation has increased approximately 108% since the past 30 years. So I just recently turned 30. And that means that something that cost me $1 is now $2, a little over $2 now in 30 years. I mean, this is just 30 years. That is not a long time. And prices have already gone up 100%. And so inflation is just destroying people's wealth. And so the national median rent is $1,300 a month, right? And so statistics show that 64% of all U.S. citizens are living paycheck to paycheck. That doesn't mean that they're not working. This is working people and middle-class people that are working. 64% of all U.S. citizens are living paycheck to paycheck. That means they're not saving. That means they're not investing. I mean, how on earth is somebody going to be able to buy a home, take care of a child? This is not even to mention that U.S. citizens with a degree are making $60,000 a year, which is only slightly more. Again, it's $4,000 more. Only $4,000 more a year than the average, than just the average person, making a salary, right? So it's only a little bit more if you have a degree. And then on top of that, the average person has $39,000 in student debt, right? So if you look at this whole thing, it's essentially extremely challenging to thrive in the Western world following a traditional nuclear family size. It's like this, ladies and gentlemen, this is what people are up against. This is what men are up against. This is what women are up against. And so just the tremendous pressure of just living life comfortably in general is already making the dating world extremely hard. Like if we have social media, which is what I'm going to talk about next, if we have social media pushing the narrative that you have to live this fast lifestyle, but then you look at the reality of how people are living, it's just impossible. People just can't live that way, right? So now let's look deeper into the social media's nefarious influence. So before the advent of social media from Facebook, which was only created in 2004, and Instagram, which was only created in 2010, so we've only had these things for less than 20 years, dating was mostly done within one's town or city. So a partner's options were based almost exclusively in and around their communities. So the internet has dramatically changed the way in which we date. And you can see me getting fired up about this. Like I get very emotional about this. It's dramatically changed the way that we date and has allowed us to become lazy in our connection and communication and connection skills. So although Tinder and Bumble and Hinge have allowed us for much more of an availability to meet larger amounts of potential mates, the software conveniently allows us to bypass all the natural filtration mechanisms we as a human have begun to develop, and cuts out, here's the key, the big word, the discernment process. So this includes one's abilities to start conversations, to develop confidence, to develop charisma, and become just more masterful in social settings in general. So that's just one factor of the social media and the dating apps. Now we get into something a little bit more nefarious. With the advent of social media, platforms like Instagram have basically become like dating apps. Women will show off their bodies and men will show off their lifestyles. And even a semi-attractive woman will be able to amass a huge following of horny men. And it's possible just to get famous simply by being attractive on these social media platforms. So this type of social media interaction will attract very, very powerful and wealthy men of the world, which is essentially less than 1%, 0.01% of the world's population. And this will make her disregard the vast majority of men who are perfectly suitable, honorable, good partners, right? So social media, one second. So social media has not only given women an inflated sense of self-worth, like, wow, all I got to do is shake my butt and I'm going to get 20,000 followers, right? But also an unrealistic expectation for what men can earn, right? So fast money and a fast lifestyle is very appealing because a traditional job cannot afford the inflated lifestyle that social media portrays. Like a classic example of all these wealthy Arab men in the UAE who just shower their women in Chanel and Hermes and all this stuff. And, you know, so these beautiful women, they see that kind of lifestyle and they're like, oh, that's how I want my man. That's how I want all men to be. And so basically what happens is that Western women's standards increase while the quality of life decreases. It's like they're looking for the top 0.0001% of all men because social media paints this idea that that's how men have to be, and that's the realistic expectation of how much men actually make. And oh yeah, all men make over $100,000 or all men make over $1 million. And it's like, well, no, that's really not the reality. The reality is that the majority of people make, about half of $100,000 in Western nations, okay? This is just in Western nations. It's even dramatically lower when it comes to the global average, right? So social media inflates people's ideas of lifestyle, inflates people's ideas of dating pool, and cuts out like 99.9% of the majority of just good, honest, hardworking people that are just trying to get by and make a living, right? And that would be perfectly fine husbands, perfectly fine fathers, perfectly fine wives, and perfectly fine mothers. But social media has had this nefarious influence on people and their dating, right? And people might not necessarily be talking about it from this perspective, but it's really, really, really important to see when it comes to how we become influenced when it goes to dating, right? Because what do, right? We get on Tinder and we're like, oh, this woman, here's my Instagram. I'm more active on Instagram. And then you go on Instagram, she's got 200,000 followers because she's got a big butt. I'm in Colombia right now and I just see this with all these women that have these gigantic asses, and then they're on Tinder and then, oh, they have 300,000 followers because I just take pictures of my butt and, all these men love me. And it's just a totally unrealistic reality of how life is. And social media has created this sort of false identification with media and ego and narcissism and quality of life. Basically, we have this totally unrealistic expectation of how the quality of one's life is actually happening, because what do on social media? We use filters and we take pictures of the highlights of our life. So people are basically looking at the highlights of one's life and thinking that that's their reality, and thinking that that's the person that they're going to be dating, and thinking that they're just going to look like this supermodel all the time, and thinking that they're just going to be buying all of these Chanel bags and being a jet setter all the time, right? Like thinking that that's how reality is and dating is, and that's just simply not the case. Like dating and life is just pretty much just sitting on one's computer or doing one's business or working out, and it's not really this gigantic glamorous lifestyle. It's just people just going to work and doing their careers and getting along, and so that's a very important thing to consider when it comes to dating and social media, right? So now we're moving into the attack on the feminine. This is a very interesting topic of conversation, and one of the people that I talked to about earlier, Galatea, she talks a lot about this, about demonizing femininity. So women have been fighting for a very, very long time for equal rights. And fortunately, a lot of things have been gained from this since feminism took a foothold within the mid-1800s to the early 1900s. So the feminist movement was originally designed to serve as a means for not only for not only being a safe space for women in the world that did not value women as much as they do today, but it also created a means to galvanize change in the rights and the well-being of women as a whole, which is fantastic, and that's really, really great. So feminism has done a lot of benefit for women, and it's super, super great. However, ironically, what has happened now is that much of Western feminist movements is not a lot, it's not that a lot of feminist women are glorifying themselves. Okay, wait a minute, let me say this differently. What has happened now within much of Western feminism movements is that what a lot of feminist women are now glorifying in themselves is what they demonize in men. Let me say that again. What they glorify in themselves is what they demonize in men. So for example, a strong and independent woman that exhibits what is seen as traditionally masculine behavior is seen as the standard for being a feminist. You're a strong and independent woman. You don't need a man to take care of yourself. You are a great feminist. Look at you. What an honor. So anger, aggression, disagreeableness, strong corporate work ethic, this idea of rugged dynamism is all considered toxic masculinity, and yet are all seen as necessary to be a feminist in the Western world. That's the paradox, that's the irony, and that's the hypocrisy. But a lot of people in the feminist movement don't talk about that, and they don't see it from that perspective. So you demonize masculinity, and so it's like you demonize what's considered toxic, you demonize what's considered masculinity, and yet you lionize and elevate and that same kind of behavior for yourself. So there's very, very little spoken in the Western world movements celebrating the nature of what makes a woman traditionally feminine. So don't you think that feminists would celebrate what it means to be feminine, right? Don't you think that if you have a movement that's celebrating and honoring women, you would honor what women are traditionally celebrated for and known for, right? So being a boss bitch is seen as more important than being nurturing or loving or graceful or elegant or healing and kind, which are all considered traditionally feminine attributes. So my speculation is that the reason why women felt like they needed to adopt this kind of boss bitch attitude is that traditionally women were not recognized as having equal value as men and were dogmatically seen through a religious lens as second to man. So therefore adopting the behavior of a man might make them be seen as on par to a man, which makes sense. You know, I'm not knocking them for adopting this kind of behavior. During that kind of time, it must have been really hard for women to be seen as having valuable opinions or be seen as valuable other than being a glorified home, a glorified maid or a glorified cook or just like a baby making factory, right? So like I can understand why women sort of wanted to adopt that kind of mentality when it came to combating men that saw them as second-class citizens. However, it's become a little too extreme now that men are seeing women as equal primarily, and being able to be on point and on par with being able to do the same things that men can do, right? So there are also very, very few models for youth or in general that exhibit a truly feminine woman as being honorable and valuable. Most of the feminine role models that women have now are just aggressive or promiscuous or just total airhead bimbos shaking their butts on TikTok or just selling their nude photographs on OnlyFans, right? So there's very few role models that women see online that actually exhibit traditionally feminine women. Like a lot of women, they say, oh, Beyonce is a great role model, right? She's like, but what do they value about her? They value this kind of like overtly kind of powerful sexuality or this powerful businesswoman. And it's like, well, I mean, that's not what's traditionally seen as valuable femininity, right? Grace and ease and modesty. A lot of those are traditionally seen as what somebody values as being feminine, and yet those are kind of pushed to the wayside, and this whole boss bitch archetype is what's glorified now for being feminine, right? So now we're going to talk about something that's quite controversial, and this is the hormonal warfare. And this goes both to men and women. They tie hand in hand together. So let's break this down, right? Hormonal warfare. This is massive, and a lot of people don't talk about this. So birth control has been touted as benefiting women and being empowering for women. However, ironically, what a lot of people will not talk about is the effects on women's biology that birth control has on their partner discernment, as well as numerous other side effects. This is really, really big. The partner discernment, because this has to do with procreation, this has to do with genes, this has to do with natural selection. A lot of the fundamental, basic, primal stuff that humans still operate on, but don't really see as totally important to consider because of a lot of other factors. But Whether we like it or not, we're sexual beings. We are basically advanced animals, and we still have basic primal functions that we operate on as human beings. So as all adult women know, and what many men may not know, is that women can only get pregnant for approximately, I forgot to write that in, it's approximately 6 days a month, and cannot get pregnant any other day of the month other than the days of her ovulation. So ovulation comes anywhere from 6 to 8 days. I forgot to put that in the presentation. That's it. Like any of the other days of the month, you can't get pregnant, all right? Now, I don't want anybody coming to me and saying, oh, I got pregnant because of this and I didn't know her ovulation was going on, all right? If you're gonna go have sex with women uncontrolled, without using contraception or whatever, that's on you. All right, I'm just letting you know that this is how women's bodies work, right? So women already naturally have birth control mechanism built into their bodies, and there's also a lot of women that, there's also a lot of women that take birth control not just for contraceptive reasons. Many of these reasons have to do with terrible periods or acne or heavy cramping that comes from periods. And a lot of women already know this. They deal with this every month. But I'm more speaking to my male audience that doesn't know this. But here's the thing. A lot of those issues, like terrible periods or acne, this probably has to do with the high level of estrogen in their body. Now, where does this high level of estrogen come from? These are likely caused by environmental factors, as we will touch more on later in this presentation. The medical industry has convinced women that birth control is the most practical means of dealing not only with contraceptives, but also other challenges that are associated with having too much estrogen in their bodies. There's a lot of evidence showing that women that quote-unquote take the pill dramatically changes their sexual preferences to their partners. There's a number of studies showing that women that take the pill exhibit, here's the key, very, very important, they exhibit stronger attraction to men that are generally considered quote-unquote less masculine. So here's a quote from the study that I'm referencing right here, okay? So this is some legitimate studies that come from real science studies. So in a lab, women using oral contraceptives show a weaker preference for masculine men, which means those of high testosterone levels and the corresponding physical hallmarks, than non-pill using counterparts. To investigate this issue in a real-world setting, psychologist S. Craig Roberts of the University of Stirling in Scotland and his collaborators gave online surveys to more than 2,500 women from various countries. According to the results, published online on October 12th in the Proceedings of the Royal Society of Biological Sciences, participants who use hormonal contraceptives while choosing their partner were less attracted to him and less sexually satisfied during the relationship than were individuals who did not use hormonal birth control. Less sexually satisfied and less attraction. How the hell are you going to have a strong relationship if you don't have sexual chemistry or you don't have physical chemistry? How are you going to have a strong, healthy relationship? Pill users were happier with their mate's financial support and other non-sexual aspects of the relationship. However, they were less likely to separate. This suggests stability might be caused by the bias of women on the pill towards low testosterone men who tend to be more faithful. Roberts suggests that women who meet their mate while taking the pill might want to switch to non-hormonal contraceptives several months before getting married to test whether their feelings for their partner remain the same. That's interesting. That's interesting how a hormonal pill that you take every month could dramatically affect the way in which you're attracted to your partner. The whole point of being in a committed relationship is to stay committed and develop in your love and your attraction to one another. If you're taking hormones that are going to dramatically affect the way in which you are attracted to your partner, that's a huge red flag that you really, really need to consider when it comes to committing to longer-term relationships. The evidence showing that women that take the pill are actually making them more sexually attracted to men that are biologically and evolutionarily considered having weaker genes. So i.e. weaker and more effeminate men. Many women reported losing attraction to their romantic partners after getting off birth control because their natural regulating hormones indicate to them that their male partner's genes are not actually the best to carry on for their progeny. This is real stuff, guys. Real stuff. These hormones are affecting women's partnership choices dramatically. Dramatically. This is not just from social media. This is not just from conflicting values. This has to do directly with one's hormones, okay? So even if you're not affected by social media, even if you've deleted all the dating apps, even if you've deleted all social media, even if you are still operating in yellow and you've done the inner work, if you're still taking these hormones, you're still going to be affected biologically by this. This is an attack on one's hormones and one's body. This is serious stuff, guys. So, it gets even crazier. So, here's some more quotes, all right? A high-quality romantic relationship offers many benefits, including better health and a higher reproductive fitness. In their attempts to form such a beneficial relationship, people are guided by mechanisms that evolve to help them identify the more suitable person in their social milieu. For example, they show a preference for body odor that signals compatibility with potential mates' immune systems. When they find such a desirable partner, people typically strive to maintain the relationship by employing strategies that protect it against the allure of alternative mates, i.e. being less attentive to or devaluing the attractiveness of alternatives. Commonly used contraceptive pills may change natural mate preferences, however. These pills introduce hormones that suppress ovulation and lead to temporary fertility loss, similarly to what happens during pregnancy. Consequently, heterosexual women's perception of men may serve a different function than that occurring around ovulation. They may pursue a cooperative partner who assists with childcare rather than a genetically compatible partner. So if you want to use red pill terms, a beta male versus an alpha male, if you want to use red pill terms to describe those. So somebody who's cooperative to assist in childcare would be a beta male, and somebody who is genetically compatible might be an alpha male. Okay, I'm not saying I agree with this, I'm just using terminology of people of that perspective to really understand what this article is saying. Many women may therefore revert to having opposite mate preferences, becoming fixed on seeking less genetically compatible men whose body odors resembles that of their apparently supportive genetic relatives. To the extent that contraceptive pills use alters mate preferences, women who have taken hormonal contraceptives while meeting their partner and later discontinuing their usage, as many do when they wish to conceive, may feel disenchanted with their initial partner choice. Indeed, these hormonal contraceptives may only affect initial partner choice, but also have unintended consequences for women's relationship satisfaction if contraceptive pills use subsequently changes. Prior studies have provided evidence for this hypothesis, indicating that women who have used hormonal contraceptives when they first meet their partner and then ceased to take them experience lower levels of sexual and relationship satisfaction and are more likely to get divorced. Guys, all of these come from serious peer-reviewed studies. This is serious stuff, guys. Okay, so the attack on the masculine. So now that we've moved from the attack on the feminine, now let's focus on the attack on the masculine. Remember, because this is two sides of the same coin. The attack on the feminine, the attack on the masculine. There's a war on both sides, not just men and not just women. Right. So due to the primary focus on feminism and women's grievances, there is often a serious oversight as to the issues that men are facing in Western society. Although there are several that we will not cover in this presentation, many of these common grievances of the men in these newly formed support groups like MGTOW or men's rights or stuff like that, comment on things like issues like getting the short end of the stick in divorce cases, men's suicide rates, double standards in datings, lack of resources for men to deal with depression, portraying men and fathers as violent or incompetent, and the growing and the normalizing of misandry online. So, for example, I challenge you to name one cartoon that has a healthy, competent male father figure. I guarantee you're probably not going to do that. Guarantee it, right? So these are a lot of the grievances that men have when it comes to how men are being portrayed in society. And so, however, we're not really going to be diving so much into that. We're going to be focusing primarily on the two challenges that are attacking men primarily, and this is pornography and frequent ejaculation, as well as the emasculation through men via hormonal warfare. Much like the grievances of women wanting sovereignty of their bodies, like that we see in third wave feminism, these things are also an attack on masculine bodies as well, but in a more subtle and nefarious form. All right, so let's dive into the science. The attack on masculine, pornography. All right, so pornography is a rampant issue that a large portion of men deal with on a regular basis, and women, but it's more concerned with men. According to Psychology Today, 90% of men admit to using pornography regularly. 90%. That's almost 100% of men that you see. Pornography gives us a totally unrealistic expectation of dating and sexuality. If we constantly expose ourselves to us, we develop the threat of creating neural pathways that make us have connections where we only get turned on by what we see on the screen, rather than what we experience in real life sex. Pornography has also been linked to gender dysphoria, troubled marriages, premature ejaculation, erectile dysfunction, confidence issues, anxiety, depression, lack of self-esteem. Oh my gosh, the list goes on and on. So the testicles are the powerhouse that creates testosterone in the male body. Testosterone is responsible for the muscle strength, physical and sexual and cognitive function of mood in men. So testosterone gets a bad rap, like, oh, you're just going to be like this roided out crazy person. It's like, no, testosterone is like the mojo for men. Like when men have a high level of testosterone, they have so much energy, they want to get things done, they want to win, they want to go out there, and you just can meet men, and you just know when men have a very low level of testosterone. You can just see it in their posture, you can just see it in the way that they talk, you can see it in the way that they carry themselves, right? So seminal fluid, or semen, carries a large portion of this testosterone, as well as a large number of plasma and important minerals to be able to create life. So men's bodies cannot differentiate between when a man is ejaculating into pornography or ejaculating with the intention of creating life. Like when you're jacking off to porn and your dick doesn't just go, oh, that's a screen or that's a womb, better change up what's in my balls, right? No, it doesn't differentiate between what sexual experience it's having. It says, okay, I'm about to have an orgasm, so I'm just going to have a baby, right? So when a man ejaculates, the body assumes that it's about to create life. And so every organ in the body quite literally shoots out the very best nutrients to create that life. So when a body has an orgasm, it says, wow, I'm going to literally carry on my genes. I better give this child the very, very best that I got. It only makes sense, right? Like your body's not going to go, I'll give you like mediocre genes. I'm going to give my kid mediocre genes and leave the best stuff for myself. No, your body says, I need to make sure that this baby is as healthy as possible, right? So when you ejaculate everywhere, you're basically depleting your body of some of the very best components that keep a man's body healthy, like testosterone, like plasma, like vitamins and minerals. Not to mention your primary source of testosterone. So when a man ejaculates multiple times a day, he's voluntarily draining himself of the very best that his body has to give to thrive. So with millions of men addicted to pornography, willingly depleting their precious testosterone levels, it makes the masses of men not only mentally, but emotionally and physically weaker as well, right? Huge problem. And we really, really need to normalize this conversation. And I'm really glad that it's becoming more normalized, that we have groups like NoFap, for example, a lot of sexual alchemy, people like Montauk Chia, are becoming more popular within the space. So I'm really glad that people are talking about these things, but there's still a lot of issues. And people kind of laugh at, pornography, that's totally normal. Ejaculation, that's totally normal. We really, really, really need to change our language around how we view this, because this is a really, really nefarious thing that's influencing our interpersonal relationships. And it's probably also contributing to the sexual violence against women. I'm willing to bet that pornography is directly related to our inability to control our sexual energy, which then turns into sexual violence against women. I'm willing to bet that pornography and sexual violence to women are directly related, although I'm not sure that there's a lot of science and studies that show that definitively that's what's happening. All right, let's go into the hormonal warfare with men. If we look at the levels of testosterone that our grandparents had, their levels of testosterone were dramatically higher than our generation now, dramatically higher. So according to an article on Forbes, studies show that men's testosterone levels have been declining for decades. The most prominent is a 2007 study, the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, reveals a substantial drop of U.S. men's testosterone since the 1980s, with average levels of declining about 1% per year. 1% per year. This means, for example, that a 60-year-old man in 2004 had the testosterone levels 17% lower than those of a 60-year-old man in 1987. Another Dana study shows that men produced similar findings with double-digit declines among men born in the 1960s compared to the men born in the 1920s. It's very interesting that people born in the 1960s, the birth control pill was actually created in the 1960s. Interesting. So mind you that this article was written 6 years ago, right? The article that is quoted above. The dramatic decrease of testosterone is not some natural reason. There's a lot of factors that are contributing to the decrease of testosterone, and those of which are primarily due to environmental factors that are dramatically increasing man's estrogen levels and decreasing their testosterone levels. So our grandparents basically had 3 times the amount of testosterone. It is making men globally, this is not just a Western thing, but globally dramatically weaker physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And so the factors that contribute to, but are not limited to, this increase in testosterone levels and this decrease in increase in estrogen levels and decrease in testosterone levels are chemicals like atrazine, synthetic estrogen in factory farm foods, microplastics, and the birth control like that women are taking. Each one of these factors in tandem creates a devastating effect on men's testosterone levels. So let's look at each one of these factors in depth. All right, atrazine. So atrazine is a chemical herbicide that is used to kill weeds on sugarcane, corn, and other industrial crops. The chemical reduces the loss of crops. The chemical reduces the loss of crops and is one of the most heavily used agents in our agriculture. According to the Environmental Working Group, 70 to 80 million pounds of atrazine were used annually as of 2014. Right now it's 2023. So imagine how much atrazine is still in the environment, in the soil, in the water, in the air now. The Federal Safe Drinking Water Act limits the amount of atrazine that can appear in state water systems. However, some scientists claim that the legal limit is still far too high and poses a public health risk. Atrazine is banned totally in Europe, and there are few restrictions on its use in the United States. After short-term exposure, atrazine affects the concentration of prolactin, progesterone, and estrogen in female rats. For humans, long-term consumption of atrazine has been linked to hormonal irregularities. Women may have low estrogen levels and irregular menstrual flow and potential birth defects. Even small amounts of atrazine may lead to misshapen limbs, low birth weights in newborns, and skill and facial malformations. Okay. There is a dramatically low number of studies actually done on atrazine because these companies have a vested interest in keeping that negative information from the public. So, I mean, these are just minor studies. We know through different historical contexts like DuPont, for example, with the chemicals, and a lot of other things like Agent Orange and a lot of those birth defect pills that women were taking. We know that these chemicals have a lot more of a detrimental effect on people, and yet people are not talking about this, and they're not talking about just how much influence it has on our hormone levels, all right? So that's just one thing. So we have the estrogen from factory farm foods. The presence of hormones in milk and dairy foods was discussed decades ago, but rather more concerns attended to that of which with respect to finding hormones as biomarkers in milk for diseases and pregnancy diagnosis. During the last couple of years, increasing body of evidence are indicating another property of hormones in dairy milk as possible impact on human health, including the role of some estrogen and insulin-like growth factor 1 initiation and provoking of breast, prostate, and endometrial tumors. Our gathered data in this peer-reviewed paper may suggest more sophisticated and analytical detection methods for estrogen determination and could be considered a remarkable concern for consumers, producers, and public health authorities. So that's basically a politically correct way of saying this is really bad and there needs to be more evidence studied on this, right? They're trying to basically lessen the blow by saying, holy crap, this is really, really not good for us, and there needs to be more studies done. Other language that these science papers like to use is inconclusive. It's like, well, I mean, no, it's not inconclusive. There's clearly serious threats to the well-being of people and their hormonal levels. So the other thing that we have is microplastics. In the last 70 years, we have abetted an increasing growth in the worldwide plastics production, which has consequently spread to the environment to such a point to where we can say that we live in a plastic world. These synthetic polymers are environmental pollutants themselves and act as vectors of transport of various kinds of chemicals, but they are also considered valid indicators of the recent and contemporary period, generally after the middle of the 20th century. The endocrinal and reproductive effects of endocrine disruptors may be the consequence of their ability to mimic natural hormones, antagonize their action, and alter their patterns of synthetic and metabolism, the pattern of synthesis and metabolism, or modify the expression of specific receptors. So microplastics basically are affecting the way in which our hormones interact within our bodies. It's basically just a verbose way of saying through the scientific article that I quoted that microplastics are wreaking havoc on hormones. And we could see tremendous amounts of microplastics in the oceans, in foods, in fish, in municipal water. Really, really bad stuff. So a lot of stuff like the chemicals that we get in shampoos, and a lot of the things that we drink, and a lot of the things that we bathe in, or a lot of the things that we clean in are also influenced, and which we're going to get into that soon. But the plastics that break down in the oceans are still affecting us dramatically within our hormones. So birth control. So as we were talking about earlier with women, how this affects women's discernment and partnership choices, let's look at how birth control actually affects men. Even if men are not taking chemical birth control, it still affects men, and this is how. Among the 11 billion women in the world who have a need for family planning, 842 million use contraceptive pills. This is a staggering amount of women using modern-day contraceptives. A lot of chemicals control, not to mention things like shampoos, lotions, and cosmetics and detergents, like we had mentioned before. A lot of the chemicals control. Oh, I'm sorry, I wrote this incorrectly. So a lot of the chemicals that they're taking, like birth control, for example, are disposed of in the toilet or other filtration mechanisms and end up circulating through municipal water that millions of people drink and bathe in. In fact, the skin is the largest organ, and it absorbs a lot of the chemicals in the water that we're exposed to. There have been a number of studies that have sought to deal with the dramatic increase of these chemicals in municipal water. However, there are promising peer-reviewed studies, but no serious action has been taken by government organizations to deal with this issue. So basically, you're essentially bathing in millions and millions and millions of women's peed out hormones from her birth control pills, as well as the other chemicals that people are bathing in, right? So every time you're in a city, for example, and hundreds of millions of women are taking these birth control pills, that birth control, those hormonal levels are not being treated by the municipal water. And if they are being treated by the municipal water, it's not a very serious effect, right? And then you just bathe in it and your skin absorbs all that estrogen and all those chemicals that women are taking. In fact, birth control, when the birth control was officially approved in the FDA of June 23rd, 1960, we can begin to see a dramatic decrease in testosterone levels. 20 years later, after a baby was born in that era, 20 years later, after a baby born in that era has 2 decades of being exposed to birth control. So sure, we can see, I think I actually forgot to add a detail in there, but basically what we see with what I meant to write within that is that a lot of the studies that were showing as testosterone was decreasing in the 1980s, a man that was born in 1960 would be 20 years old in 1980, and then we can start to see the decrease in testosterone around men in the 1980s when the birth control pill was introduced. Yes, correlation does not mean causation. However, I do find that correlation quite fascinating, right? So all of these things, the hormones on men, this is basically making men more effeminate, right? So all of these chemicals that men are bathing in, it's decreasing their testosterone. Men are ejaculating, so they're losing their testosterone levels and all the chemicals in the plasma and the things that they need to create healthy life. So there is basically a massive warfare on our hormones. And this, I think, is what is pointing to why so many people are overly effeminate. And this is where we get the whole thing about green, right? I think that because green is a paradigm that has recently arisen since the 60s, right, this whole hippie thing, and when was birth control created? 1960. Right? So we see a very, very interesting correlation between the rise of green and the attack on the hormones, right? Now, some will say that, green has done a lot of really, really good for us, and I totally agree. Absolutely 100%. However, again, there's a lot of shadow and a lot of negative things that happen as a rise of this hormonal warfare increase. So what do we do about this? Well, I'm not telling you what to do with your bodies. I'm just bringing to your attention what's happening to your body that you may not be aware of. So something that you can consider is good old-fashioned abstinence. There's no more effective birth control means than abstaining from sex. But if that's not something that you want to do, perhaps you can consider more natural means of contraception. And I'm not an expert in that. You can look into things. There's plenty of people that were doing natural forms of contraception. I know that copper has an effect on being able to be killing sperm, but don't quote me on that. I would look more into natural forms of contraception. And I would also encourage men to check their testosterone levels. How high is your testosterone? And then actively take time to eat foods or take supplements that increase your testosterone naturally. So things like maca root, DHEA, chelated zinc, ashwagandha, even like a little pinch of borax in your water has been shown to increase your testosterone levels. Yeah, really, really keep in mind that you're under attack. Men and women, our hormones are under attack, and we need to really, really address this head on and not really fight each other, but really see and say, how can we deal with this? What can we do about this? How can we work together, right? So the last thing that I want to talk about, here we go. Oh, wait a minute, okay. The last thing that I want to talk about in terms of the war on things going on is our attack on sexuality. So one of the main grievances of fourth wave feminism is the Me Too movement, which was to raise awareness of the consistent and rampant and often brushed off sexual abuse and sexual assault that has happened and has become totally normalized within the Western world, but in global culture in general. It's really terrible stuff, what's happening. These results of this have been absolutely catastrophic to the health and the well-being of men and women. And those who have not looked into the statistics of sexual assault in the U.S. would be shocked. So let's look into the statistics, right? According to the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, this is what a lot of people don't know, is that men are also dramatically under attack, right? So 1 in 5 women in the United States experience completed or attempted rape during their lifetime. That's astonishing. 1 in every 5 women. That's insane. Nearly a quarter, or almost 25% of men in the U.S. have experienced some form of sexual violence in their lifetime. A fourth of men. That's a lot. Okay? Nationwide, 81% of women and 43% of men reported experiencing some form of sexual harassment or sexual assault in their lifetime. That means that the majority of women, the vast majority of women, have experienced some form of sexual assault in their life or sexual harassment. That is not okay. 1 of 3 female victims of completed or attempted rape experienced it within the first time between the ages of 11 and 17. That's astonishing. 1 of 3 female victims. That's crazy. Oh my God. About 1 of every 4 male victims of completed or attempted rape experienced it between 11 and 7. That's a very, very close statistic. There's an estimated 773,000 people that were raped, included, threatened, and attempted and completed rape in the U.S. in 2018. 40% of rapes and sexual assaults were reported to the police, but only about 25% were reported to the police in 2018. And 40% were reported in 2017, while only about 25% were reported in 2018. And the prevalence of false reporting for sexual assault crimes is low, anywhere between 2 to 10%. Now, 10%, that's pretty high for accusing somebody of sexual assault. That'll really, really destroy your life. And that's also something that Red Pill has quoted as saying that women are having false accusations for sexual assault, which is really not okay, and that should also be a crime. However, it does show that the reporting is very, very low of that actually happening. So this comes to the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. Some legitimate major stuff. This is a huge, huge problem, and this is what causes a lot of women to not trust men, and this is also what causes a lot of men to be depressed and angry and not feel like they can have a resource to talk about these kinds of things, right? If there's not a resource for men to talk about these kinds of things, especially being a victim of rape, and society just tells them to man up and be a man about it, my God, could you imagine having to swallow being raped as a child? As a man and having no resources because men tells you to be a man and deal with it? My God, I mean, no wonder why men's suicide rates are so high, right? So this is some serious stuff that we really, really need to talk about in order to heal what's going on between men and women right now. All right, heavy stuff. But now let's talk about the solutions. We're going to tie this all in together. What do we actually do about this? There's solutions. And the solutions are actually quite simple. However, we need to be conscientious that we need to actively work towards making solutions to fix these problems. So let's check it out. Why do I bring this all up? The scope of the relationship issue that we face as a society goes far beyond liberal and conservative politics. All of the factors that we've considered are affecting every side of the spectrum. All of these factors contribute to the toxic dating environment that we live in. Whether you're liberal or you're conservative, you're still being affected by this stuff. Whether you have a different value system, whether you think differently about your role as a man or a woman, you're still being affected by this external stuff. So many of these things brought up in this presentation do not have only to do with overt trauma, but also environmental trauma that is affecting us unknowingly. When we can come to appreciate that even if there may not be a deliberate warfare on our bodies and the minds of men and women in Western countries, even if there's not some grandiose conspiracy against men and women, the environment certainly appears that it seems to be so. The fact is that we have a surplus of estrogen in our whole environment, which creates a weakened and sick population. Healthy, emotionally mature, high testosterone men can help lead a healthy world and generation. And healthy, safe, emotionally mature, hormonally regulated women will heal the world and build family units. That's what we need. Healthy men and women that are integrated, conscious, aware, present to what's going on, and not fighting each other and not pointing fingers at each other, but actually unifying hand in hand to deal with the challenges that we're facing as a society and as a species. With a combination of awareness, maturity, dialogue, and active conscious development from men and women, we can begin to heal the world and bring about more peace and harmony between men and women. All right, let's talk about how to do it. What men and women need to do to properly integrate and to get to yellow and beyond. Let's talk about men first. Men, we need to study the history of feminism and understand its grievances and integrate their points. I guarantee you that most men have no idea what first and second wave feminism talks about. I guarantee you they don't know anything about, not anything. I guarantee you that most men don't know what women are talking about or what they're fighting for. And if they do, they dismiss it or call it silly. We need to hear what they have to say. We need to listen. We need to integrate. We need to become aware of their legitimate grievances and figure out what we can do as men to be of support and ally to them. Okay? We need to develop a stronger sense of emotional and spiritual intelligence. Society has taught men that experiencing or feeling their emotions or expressing their emotions makes them gay or somehow less of a man, right? The fact of the matter is that everybody experiences emotions and everybody experiences some sort of relationship to a spiritual side, okay? We need to develop a stronger and better and healthier relationship to cope with and interact with our emotional and spiritual intelligence, right? This is really, really going to help heal our relationship between men and women. We need to actively work to reduce pornography usage and frequent ejaculation. We need to help with our testosterone levels, like I was mentioning earlier. We need to develop purpose and direction. If men have no purpose and direction in life, how are they going to lead? How are they going to be a strong masculine role model? How are they going to be a healthy man? How are they going to be a good father? How are they going to be a good leader? How are they going to be good in their communities? They're not, right? So we need to seek to become better people every day for yourself, not just to attract a mate. A lot of men get into personal development so that they can bang a bunch of hot girls, okay? Don't do that. Get into personal development, becoming a better man, so you can be a better man, all right? Everything else comes as a byproduct, all right? Trust me. We need to have more heart-based leadership. We need to be more conscientious. We need to be more aware. We need to make decisions that are based on the well-being of everybody, not just the bottom line or not just what you think God wants you to do, okay? Or not just what social media tells you to do, or how we can, be less toxic masculine, right? A yellow-based person is going to lead with integrity, they're going to lead with logic, but they're also going to be making good, sound, honest, holistic decisions for everybody, right? We need to make women feel emotionally and physically safe. If the majority of women are getting raped in their lives, how on earth are they supposed to feel safe around men? How on earth are they supposed to be able to heal the relationship with men? They can't. So you need to be able to actively make sure that women are feeling safe, that their emotions are valid, that they're in the presence of a man that can make them feel like they can just be themselves, right? And, we also need to appreciate how hard raising a family is, right? We need to really come aware of the reality that it's really hard to raise a family. And that we need to step up and be big boys and just be a man and just face reality and do the very best we can and ally ourselves with people that can support us, right? All right, so that's for men. And, a lot of these deal with women too. This is not just men. A lot of these are both men and women, but these have more of a masculine or more of a feminine tilt to them. So what can women do, right? It's not just about men being shit and men need to fix their problems. Like, women need to really, really step up too. Really, really need to take accountability to step up too, just as much as men. So what do women need to do? They need to become educated of the dangers and the negative side effects of birth control. I hope that my presentation did a good enough job, but really, really dive into it. Really look to see how your hormones are being affected and how that's really, really wreaking havoc on your decision-making skills when it comes to partners. Listen to the grievances of Red Pill and men's rights movements and integrate their points. See what men are talking about. Really see that men struggle a lot and don't have a lot of resources. Really, really appreciate that men struggle too. A lot, right? It's also important to set gentle but firm boundaries. Part of the reason why women feel like they're being taken advantage of is because men will just take whatever they want, and women will just want to be gracious and accommodating and just never really feel like their voice is heard or their rights or their well-being or what they actually want is being heard or appreciated. So it's important to set gentle boundaries. Not just be a raging bitch and be like, fuck you, but just calmly and graciously and say, hey, these are my values, these are my boundaries. If you can't follow them, that's fine. I still love and respect you, but I need to be able to get out of this relationship if you can't follow and respect my boundaries. That's a healthy way of setting boundaries. And also recognize too that men show, that if you say, oh, I want an emotional man, I want to be a man that can show his emotions. And if a man doesn't really know how to deal with his emotions, be prepared for a man that might really, really scare you when it comes to him really showing his emotions. right? That might be challenging for you. And if you're not grounded consciously in yourself, it might be scary, and it might actually turn you off to see a man truly showing his full colors, right? So be prepared for that. Be prepared to hold space for men if that's something that you really want, right? But also appreciate that a man feels equally as a woman. Man feels equally as sad, feels equally as depressed, feels equally as angry, feels equally as anxious or frustrated. But society has told them that they're not allowed to express those emotions. And that wreaks havoc on a lot of men. That's why a lot of men turn to alcohol. That's why a lot of men turn to violence. That's why a lot of men just watch TV all the time. That's why a lot of men disassociate. Because that's how they cope with it, right? And then you wonder why men are so emotionally unavailable. That's why. So we need to recognize that it's an honor for a healthy man to want to lead and serve. It's so sad for me when I see like really good, honest men just be like, look, I recognize that women can take care of themselves and that they can be independent and that they don't need me, but I want to give them things. I want to serve them. I want to make sure that they feel safe and protected and provided for. I want to be able to give them the opportunity to not work if they don't want to. Like, that's an honor and a duty, and men, healthy men, love that. And it's extremely emasculating when women don't let men do that, because that's like basically saying to a woman that they don't value, that a man doesn't value their ability to give birth or their ability to nurture. That's like basically saying that they don't value a man's core, is to be able to protect and provide and make a woman feel safe and loved and free, right? So recognize that men want to do that. Healthy, conscious men want to do that. And to take that away from them is emasculating for them. And appreciate how hard it is to provide for a family. Like we went over earlier, it is hard to live a quote-unquote traditional nuclear family lifestyle. It is tough. So the best thing that you can do is be supportive of a man and not tear him down, not call him names, not call him incompetent, but to figure out a way to mutually support him, perhaps through a business or through an opportunity to make money together or to grow or build something together that you're both proud of, that you're both happy with, that is creating wealth or financial stability for the both of you. In fact, there's some statistics showing out that divorce rates dramatically decrease when a man and a woman get into a business together. It's very interesting, right? And of course, test your hormone levels and balance out your levels, because you too are being affected by this overabundance of estrogen, and that is very detrimental to your body. Now, what can we both do? Well, we need to become more masterful of our sexual energy. We need to not just be seeking to have sex with a bunch of people all the time out of like animalistic impulses to just bang, right? We also need to take accountability and responsibility for our actions and don't blame each other. Now, when you point the finger, there's 3 fingers pointing back at you. Always consider, what can I do to fix the problem? What can I do to be an ally? What can I do to be better? Really, 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 really important. That's the foundation, personal responsibility. What can I do to make the world a better place, right? We need to seek to be constructive and helpful in relationships. Have open, healthy, heart-based dialogue. We need to seek to become whole within oneself. We can't expect our partners to fill in the gaps in the void for ourselves. We need to seek to become whole and healed and integrated ourselves. And this is what happens when we get into yellow, okay? We need to begin courting again. You know, we do these one-night stands, we do this hookup culture, we get into situationships. It's just garbage. It's just garbage. So we need to really make courting great again. Go out on dates, get to know people before you start getting sexually intimate. That's when the feelings start happening, and then it gets sticky, and then it's just a nightmare. So we really need to start courting again. We need to have clear goals when we're dating. We really need to know what we want, what we're getting into when we're dating. And, you know, not try to convince some woman that you met at the bar who was like drunk and all over you to turn them into a serious girlfriend, and vice versa. Not turn some egotistical douchebag into like this good family man. Like, you're not going to do it. Stop trying to change the other person, right? So we have to actively work to removing ghosting culture. It's just part of this garbage hookup culture that we have now. We have to learn the art of conscious communication. Another way to do that is nonviolent communication. We need to learn the art of consciously breaking up rather than leaving terrible taste in our mouths and totally cutting off our heart and just deleting and hating a person who was a very, very important and loving, beautiful part of your life that shaped a lot of who you became. Right? Like cutting somebody out and treating them like garbage because things aren't working out, like that's defeating the whole purpose of learning from a relationship, right? And also become conscientious of the value of hard work and $1. Like a lot of people that want somebody to take care of them, whether we're looking for a sugar mommy or a sugar daddy, or they want to get into traditional relationships, they may not value the power of $1. They might just like see that, oh, you know, you're just the one that's going to take care of me, sugar mommy or sugar daddy. And they may just totally have a totally unrealistic expectation of how hard it is to make money and how hard it is to thrive in the world. And then that creates a sense of entitlement, and it also creates a sense of unrealistic expectations, right? So a lot of things that we can do to benefit and help ourselves to becoming better people. All right. That concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for sitting with me through this. I really don't know how long this presentation, I think it's like over 2 hours or something like that. But this is really the information that we need to be talking about. This is the information that we need to be diving into and actively working on every single day, and not pointing fingers at one another and not polarizing ourselves with radicalized third wave feminism or all of these, you know, red pill movements or whatever, but to really, really look at what's going on from a bird's eye, holistic view and say, wow, okay, we got a lot of work to do, but the solutions are pretty simple and this is what we can do. So I really encourage you to share this video with as many people as you can, because the more people that we can get doing this inner work, the more people we can get seeing this information from a bird's eye perspective, the more we can really, really heal the world. Because this is what we need. This is how we will transcend the challenges that we're experiencing as a Western civilization today and as a whole of the world today, because eventually people that, countries and nations that develop into this phrase and this phase of one's social and economic, socioeconomic progression will eventually probably go through this phase as well, right? And we're actually starting to see this. And so if we can take the lead and start to integrate this and navigate this tumultuous time, we can be trailblazers for nations and for groups of people and for new generations to have healthier, more dynamic, holistic, healed families and relationships and view of how we view ourselves as men and women in society. So thank you for taking the time to really listen and integrate this information. And I look forward to seeing you guys in other videos in the future.